by now we have people here, so.
Well, Good evening. Thank you for being here, and welcome to our first meeting in June. It's hard to believe that we're about halfway through the year and almost officially in summer. Of course, if you're around Redwood City on Friday nights, it is fully summertime already by a couple of weeks. So with that, I'd like to ask City Clerk Vonderlinden for a roll call, please.
Certainly. Councilmember Aguirre.
Here.
Councilmember Borgens.
Here.
Councilmember G.
Here.
Councilmember Howard.
Here.
Councilmember Mazer.
Here.
Vice Mayor Bain.
Here.
Mayor Seaver.
Here.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Bain, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Please join me in the pledge to our flag.
I have a pleasure tonight to do a couple special orders a day. The first one is the recognition of green businesses. And I'm going to invite Vicki Sherman up. She's our Environmental Initiatives Coordinator for the City of Redwood City. There you are. Thank you. So tonight, I think this is always important, but I think some of the things that have been going on nationally and internationally recently, and I want to start this off by saying I appreciate this probably more than past years in that these businesses join Redwood City in our commitment, not only to the many strategic initiatives we have or initiatives surrounding the environment, but I also want to take this opportunity. I've answered numerous emails on this, but our city has signed on to continue with the Paris Accord. I have, as the mayor, we've done that. Our staff has taken the leadership on making sure that we are continue to be aligned with that. So, but I really see that. And this as a partnership, and this is just another partnership that we do with our businesses that become certified in the San Mateo County Green Business Program. The San Mateo County Green Business Program is a partnership of agencies and utilities and cities and the county and businesses, and to promote businesses that are operating in an environmentally responsible manner. So our city, along with a number of other cities in San Mateo County, partner in this program and recognize businesses that become certified. Not only is this part of a larger statewide program, but it's one of the goals of our Redwood City's climate action plan. So we'd like to commend them for successfully completing this certification process and thank these businesses for their continued support. So I'm going to call the names, and as they come up, we will present them with award. And with that, they're right over here. So the first one is the San Mateo County Human Services Agency from San Mateo County. And I believe representing that is to be determined. So come on up. Congratulations. The next one is another department of the county, the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. And I believe we have, and I am going to put my glasses back on, Emmy? Is there? Oh, well, very popular. Thank you. Could have done that twice. Thank you. Crystal Springs Catering, we all know very well. Robert Santana. Robert, are you here? There he is. Come on up. Okay, X Time, and representing X Time is Andrea Jara. Here, Andrea. And the San Mateo County Historical Association, and I saw Mitch earlier. wondering why Mitch was at our meeting tonight. I always love seeing Mitch. Congratulations. That's right. And the San Mateo County Parks and Recreation Department, represented by Sam Hertzberg. Thought maybe Emmy was going to get another one. And I know that we also want to recognize Goodwill Recompute, and I believe they had no one that could attend tonight, but Goodwill Recompute. So again, thank you for participating, for going through the process of getting certified, and mostly for being a business that cares about more than just yourself, but also cares about our environment. So thank you very much. Thank you. So for our next special order of the day, we are doing another one of our recognition of a welcoming star, and this is for First Church. So I would like to invite up Jana Kaiser from Redwood City 2020. There she is. And also the Executive Director of First Church, Kathy Foskett. Kathy? So I'm going to introduce Jana and have her say a few words about the welcoming star.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I am the Executive Director of a community collaborative here in Redwood City and North Fair Oaks that we call Redwood City 2020. The city is an important member of Redwood City 2020, as are a number of other organizations and agencies here in the community who are dedicated to working together to ensure that all young people and their families are healthy and safe and successful here. Part of the Redwood City Together, Redwood City 2020 work is an initiative that we call Redwood City Together. And the idea of Redwood City Together is that we can build a community of empathy and understanding across race lines and class and any other social divides that we may have here within our community. And so this, of course, is particularly important in our current political climate, given that in any case, wherever we are on the political spectrum, there is a need to come together and to build empathy and respect across our ideological differences and cultural backgrounds. And so as part of the Redwood City Together work, we give an award in partnership with the city once a quarter. And the intention is to honor organizations and programs that are doing tremendous work to do the work of Redwood City Together, to build empathy and respect across all sorts of divides. And so tonight, it is our honor to honor First Church, and the mayor's going to describe a little bit of why we selected the church in particular this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. So this is interesting. As I read this about First Church today, so I do a little trivia, been doing a little trivia thing for the people that read the pilot in the Shores. And my question last month was, there was a city department that existed before the city of Redwood City. Do we know what that is? The fire department. They were formed in 1861. Interesting fact, this is an organization. Why did I bring that up? Because we're not talking about the fire department. First Church began living out its faith and serving the Redwood City community in 1862. So that's a full 155 years ago. They've got its beat by 5. So they were like 5 years old when we were born. So I think that's amazing. They have actively shared their facility for free with organizations, and it is very difficult for organizations to find space in town for other nonprofits and schools and civic organizations. And they've constantly been a great partner with other nonprofit community groups, and have delivered the importance of building relationships and bringing resources and just energizing their people to be involved in the community. So I think it's wonderful. So on behalf of the city and the city council, I want to present First Church with a certificate of recognition for being a welcoming star in Redwood City. And thank you for doing it for even longer than we've been around. So thank you. You should remind them that. She wanted me to know that she wasn't here in 1862. So just for the record, right. So neither was I. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we will get to our public comment section. I do have some speakers cards here. This is not only for items that are not on the agenda, but this is also a time when we have people speak on the consent calendar. I do know that I have one speaker's card here from the consent calendar. So with that, I will call speakers up. You will have 3 minutes, and I will call you two at a time so that the next person can queue up a little bit. So my first speaker is Derek Scott, and he will be followed by Augustin Espino.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Scott. I am the lead pastor at Rise City Church on Middlefield Road, formerly known as Tapestry Church. We have our second annual block party coming up June 24th, and I just want to thank the mayor and the city council who did come out to last year's block party event. So this year it's going to be June 24th from 12 to 4, and we're including a classic car show this year. So last year we had over 300 people show up, and we're anticipating over 500 this year. So again, it's June 24th, 12 to 4 p.m., and it's a Saturday, classic car show and block party. The event's entirely free. Jump houses, face painting, petting zoo, things like that for our community. So I'd like to invite everyone here too as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you'll get an email out to the council, that'd be great. Thank you. Mr. Espino, followed by Daniel Tintor.
Hi, good evening. My name is Agustin Espino. I live in 425 Douglas Avenue in the corner of Middlefield. The reason I'm here, I want to know who's the council members, and also for the past couple years, we've been having issues where I live in the corner, people drinking, doing pee, and then it's frustration to see that happen. I've been in Fair Oaks community meetings, talking to the sheriff department, and then because I'm in the middle of Douglas, they say half is the city, half is the sheriff, so they basically throw the ball one side to another, and good luck with that. And then, so this past week, I leave to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. My kids go to school, they take to school to around 7:30. My wife took them. And then around that time, I believe it was Thursday, I get a call in the morning from my son, 10 years old. And I have a daughter, 5. So he said, hey, Dad, the drunk people over here, Pablo, he's doing pee right in front of us where we were leaving. I couldn't say nothing. Later, I talked to my wife. I said, did you call the police? They said, yeah, I did call the police. And the lady that answered the phone, she told me, oh, you belong to sheriff department? And she transferred me, and I wasn't able to speak to no one. Back then, Councilmember G was on the meeting over there at the Fair Oaks. I don't know if you recall me, same story. Please help me. Or advise me what to explain to my kids. When these drunk people all doing pee in the pants, or they don't care. And then, so the police said to me, well, it's nothing we can do. If we don't see physically, it's nothing we can do. I understand that, but these people know what they're doing over there. So they're not going to hold the beer all the time on the hands. It's a white fence right there in the corner. So what they do, they put in like a coffee cup. They put the beer, they put it there, and they look on the street. And they look like it's just standing there, but they are drinking there. And I invite you guys to walk that area, and you guys can see how it is. I care about the city. I care about my community. I want to do everything I possibly can to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will, Mr. Espino, I will have our staff contact you. I have your information. If we could have somebody from staff contact him and clarify some things. Okay, so we'll have somebody contact you. Actually, Captain Spicer will talk to you right now. That's how fast they'll call you. They'll just call you out of the audience. Thank you. So with that, Daniel Tintor, followed by Philip Levinson.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, council members, audience. Yeah, my name's Daniel Tintor. My wife and I moved to Redwood City in 1982, and I've been a chiropractor in Redwood City since 1986. And I've seen the changes in Redwood City, especially over the last three to 4 years with the building, and that's what I want to talk about, the precise plan. I spoke before to the City Council about the precise plan and a few of the members of City Council individually, too. And I just learned that there's even more construction going on El Camino, I guess, where the Burger King recently was vacated near Hopkins and El Camino. And there's some big structure going in there. And that prompted me to come to tonight's meeting in lieu of the basketball game and speak to you all about it. I'm upset with the way things are going with the precise plan, and I think we need to put the brakes on and have controlled growth in the city. The amount of traffic here is out of control. Getting into and out of Redwood City is very difficult now. Woodside Road has always been a disaster, Woodside Road and 101. And now Whipple and 101 is a close second, and Edgewood and the Alameda can be a disaster on morning commutes and evening commutes. And we need to look at, we talk about the city going green. Well, I'm just thinking about all the extra fossil fuels generated by cars sitting in traffic, in cars looking for parking in Redwood City and such, and going up and down the El Camino on various streets, even on Saturdays. We need to take another look here and maybe stop the construction and do some traffic control studies, because not everybody is taking public transportation as we were led to believe in the precise plan if we built along the corridors of the train and the bus system. And I think it's time to slow down and maybe not issue so many building permits right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Philip Levinson.
Thank you. Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council, thank you for having me. My name is Philip Levinson, a resident here in Redwood City. And my mother's here, also a homeowner here in Redwood City going back 12 years. I'm here to address item 6E on the consent calendar. And it's particularly important because I have some expertise in the area of water and technology. My concern is not over the project that's being proposed, but I have concerns about the vendor and the potential reliability of this vendor. Smart Utility Systems, the proposed contract is for $389,000. Just by looking through some public records on the internet, this is from Mammoth Community Water District. I've made copies of this available. This is from the minutes of a board meeting May of 2016, and I'll just read verbatim. Again, this is publicly available. Mammoth Community Water District staff has made the decision to officially terminate the existing contract with Smart Utility Systems for providing a usage and analytics portal for the district and its customers. After 9 frustrating months of working with SUS, the water product simply did not meet the stated performance requirements necessary for the district to roll out the application to its customers. Several features and functions of the application still did not work properly at the time of contract termination, including multi-account management, billing notifications, and payments, and violation reporting. So I've made this available. You can review it. My concern with the proposed contract is I believe a representative of the city should at least contact the general manager of Mammoth Community Water District to understand what the concerns were before a contract of this size were to be approved. So that 10 minutes of time to talk to that GM, I think, would be well worth waiting for to understand better what those issues were. And if the city decides to proceed, it is a 6-year contract. That's lengthy. I've know a lot about the industry. That's a very long contract, perhaps either shortening the contract or building in some opt-outs at the end of each year and having to go back to City Council each year for each annual approval, I think might be wise. That's my suggestion, and I'm happy to answer any questions offline.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes our speakers' cards. If any changes are to be made to the consent calendar, they'll be done at that time. Oh, wait a minute. I apologize. I seem to have missed a speaker's card. Interestingly, it says highly unusual, but I need to call actually myself to the podium. Vice Mayor Bain, City Council, staff, members of the public that are here tonight with us. Tonight I wish to take a couple minutes to speak to you about a very special person in our midst. Walking the halls of this building, this person would need no introduction, and what I'm going to say will ring true for all of you if you've met her before. A very short version of the list of her attributes would include hardworking, loyal, responsive, faithful, caring, and the list of descriptions would go way past my 3 minutes, and I know how that works. The person I wish to bring to your attention tonight is our City Clerk, Sylvia von der Linden. Is why I'm also standing over here. So I am bringing Sylvia to your attention tonight because it is her last night in a City Council meeting serving the community of the Redwood City as our City Clerk. And as much as she'd like me to sit down and never have done this, and she's moving far away, so she's out of her reaches, I hope. She deserves the attention for a couple of minutes, and while we all show her how much we care. So I would ask that you would please stand and with me and show Sylvia how much she'll be missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will be watching my back for the next couple of weeks. Thank you. The council did have a time with Sylvia last week to celebrate her and give her our thoughts personally. Sylvia is a person of great humility and didn't want that, but I know that we needed to recognize her service, long service, and commitment. So thank you very much. With that, we will go to public comment. We'll go to consent. We need to take two items on their own first. I need to be recused from and abstain on 6.1b. I don't know whether there's a conflict or not, but because we didn't have time to fully research it, I will step away on that vote. So if we could turn it over to Vice Mayor Bain, who will conduct the vote on 6.1b. Yes.
And Mayor Seaver, I'd like to pull item 6.3C also and take that one separate. And I'll be abstaining from that item as I live right across the way from the landscape maintenance district that is in the item, and that my home is within 500 feet of the boundary of that landscape district.
Okay, so we'll take 6.1b, led by Vice Mayor Bain. Then I will lead the vote on 6.3c next.
And then I'd like to pull 6.1e based on the last speaker's comment, just so we can ask a couple of questions related to that.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. So item 6.1b, we will do a electronic vote. Mayor Siebert abstaining.
Do we need a motion on that first?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, so moved.
Vice Mayor Bain, may I make a comment on this item? Just for everyone's information, this is an item where Caltrain will be making improvements to 3 of our grade crossings here in Redwood City, Whipple, Main, and Broadway. This project is funded by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, and it includes new vehicle and pedestrian gates, new sidewalks and ramps, pavement markings, and striping. The project has been, it was out to bid, should be awarded in August, and construction should be in the fall and hopefully completed by May of 2018. So just a little bit more information about what the item is, and it's a safety improvement funded by the CPUC.
Thank you for those comments. We have a motion and a second. Electronic vote, please.
Motion carries with Mayor Siebert abstaining and recused. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on item 6. I need a motion on item 6.3C.
So moved.
A motion is second on 6.3C. Electronic vote, please.
Motion carries with Councilmember G abstaining and recused. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, we wanted to pull item. You want to pull it for comment or pull it to vote?
Well, I'd just like to actually pull it for a couple of questions,
Okay.
just to see if our staff, anyone in our public works staff, could respond to the questions that were raised about this vendor, Smart Utility Systems.
Also, we do need to do the rest of the consent calendar.
Yeah, we are.
Hi, good evening, Council.
Yeah, so
Justin Chappell.
the question is, thank you, Mr. Chappell. Just generally, did you have any responses, or have you spoken with other jurisdictions about their experience with this vendor?
Yes, we did check several references, and for the most part, they were positive. That we did call Mammoth and did hear the same comments that the person was presented tonight. But the remainder of the vendors or the agencies that we did call had a positive review of the vendor.
Okay. So despite those comments, you're comfortable moving forward with this?
Yes, we've also built in some provisions in the contract that could assist us if we had to exit the agreement.
What is our termination clause?
Pretty much for no reason, all 30 days.
All right, thank you. So with that, I'm comfortable moving forward on this item. I'll move 6.1E.
Okay, with that, actually, I'd take a motion on everything except what we've already voted on, 6.1B and 6.3C. Do I have that motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion, a second on the rest of the consent calendar. Electronic vote, please.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, those various votes, we voted on a few things. I will read the items that haven't already been mentioned. We voted on our quarterly investment report for the period ending March 31st. Railroad construction and maintenance agreement, we talked about that. Agreements to allow the parking of city vehicles and city employee vehicles in box. Interesting. I'm going to pause here real quick. We made an agreement with the box building that we're going to move at least 25 city vehicles, if not as many as 50, with employees who I hope will take advantage of parking there as well. So we're going to move as many as 75 vehicles off of other places where the public can't park or can park into a place where the public can't park. So that will free up about 75 new spaces downtown during the day especially. So purchase of self-contained breathing apparatuses for use by the fire department. Agreement with Smart Utility Systems, we just heard about that. Approval of the general and special releases to resolve litigation, Wong versus the City of Redwood City. Approval of draft meeting minutes for the closed session held on May 18th and closed session interview session, regular meetings on May 22nd. Final acceptance of the 1092 2nd Avenue subdivision, annual appropriations limit for fiscal year 17-18. Redwood Family House Transitional Housing Loan Forgiveness. Levy of benefit assessments for fiscal year 17-18 Redwood Shores Landscape Maintenance District. Levy of benefits assessment for fiscal year 17-18 for the Seaport Center Maintenance District. Levy of benefit assessments for fiscal year 17-18 for the Seaport Boulevard Landscape Maintenance District. Resolution approving the temporary street closures for the 4th of July celebration. Second reading of the ordinance to establish the certificate of compliance process, and approval of claims and checks dated June 2nd, 2017, and the usual necessary payments through June 26, 2017. Thank you. With that, moving on to item 8A, our first staff report. This has been traditionally, this is the appointment of Pamela Aguilar to the position of city clerk. Pamela is here with us tonight. Pamela, thank you. Wave, maybe, or something. There you go. And interestingly enough, these appointments were previously done on consent, but because of that, they are now, because of some changes in the law, they are now done to adopt this in closed session. But the City Council did an extensive search through a recruitment firm, had a number of good applicants, did some extensive reviewing of those applicants, and then a couple rounds of interviews with the various candidates, put them through a significant competitive process, and it was with unanimous decision that the council moved to call Pamela Aguilar as our city clerk. And you can read, we'll talk about her when we swear her in sometime in July. But with that, this is a motion. I need a motion and a second to adopt the resolution of the City Council appointing Pamela Aguilar to the position of city clerk.
So moved.
A motion and a second. Electronic vote, please.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, and now it says that I should acknowledge you. See, you're going to need to know this. I don't always follow instructions. So, with that, thank you. Congratulations. We look forward to having you. And thank you for being here tonight. So to that, we move to item 8B, the City Council appointments to the Library Board and the Planning Commission. I would like to ask Sylvia von der Linden, I believe, to conduct these. And I think we are doing the Library Board first. Is that right?
Correct. Mayor Siebert, in your red folders, you have some tally sheets. You'll be appointing tonight for 2 seats on the Libraries Board and then 3 seats for the Planning Commission. I will ask, this will be by roll call. And so this completes our phase 2 recruitment for boards, commissions, and committees appointments. We will start for Library Board. Please select 2. Councilmember Aguirre.
Janet Lawson and Mr. Liu.
Thank you. Councilmember Borgens.
Lisa Hicks and Janet Lawson.
Thank you. Councilmember G.
Lawson, Liu.
Thank you. Councilmember Howard.
Lisa Hicks Dumansky and Janet Lawson.
Thank you. Councilmember Mazer.
Janet Lawson and Lisa Hicks Dumansky.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Bain.
Lisa Hicks Dumansky and Janet Lawson.
Mayor Siebert.
Lisa Hicks Dumansky and Janet Lawson.
Thank you. The appointees to the Library Board are, excuse me, Janet Lawson and Lisa Hicks Dumansky. Thank you. Because they got 4 votes or more. Thank you.
Good. With that, we will move on to the appointment of the Planning Commission.
Mayor Siebert, before we begin that, may I?
May.
Mayor Siebert, Council, before we begin the voting on the Planning Commission, I'm aware that there have been a number of comments and perspectives on the issue about the candidate pool. And so I'd like to ask our city attorney that if she's reviewed this and if she would state for the record whether there are any conflicts between me and the candidate pool.
Thank you, Councilmember G. So yes, I have reviewed the issue. There has been a question about whether there's a conflict of interest in the appointments of planning commissioners because one of the planning commission applicants is an employee at the same company where Councilmember G is employed. And I did look into it. The Political Reform Act prohibits council members from participating in decisions where they have a financial interest or a financial conflict of interest. And in this case, there is no financial interest. The commissioner, the applicants do not have, don't serve as a source of income to Councilmember G and don't have any other disqualifying financial interest. Therefore, there is no conflict at issue.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez, for that. I appreciate it and intend to follow our city attorney's advice.
Could I just make one comment?
Yes, Councilwoman Mazer.
So thank you for asking. I think one thing I'd like to say after we take this vote tonight is I'd like to request that we take a look at our conflict of interest policies for the boards, commissions, and committees. And the city attorney was good enough to research some for me and share some from other cities. And I think, we obviously will move forward with the vote tonight, but for future votes, I'd like to, whatever the right committee is to take that up of the council, I'd love to see if we could develop something.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement, and we'll figure out where it belongs at the next. Can you put that on mayor, vice mayor agenda, just so we can figure out where it gets plugged into? Is that it? Okay, with that, City Clerk Von der Linden, conduct the polling, please.
So for the Planning Commission, I'm going to ask you to vote for 3 seats. We're going to start with Councilmember Borgens.
Rick Hunter, Mohammed Savdari, and Ernie Schmidt.
Thank you. Councilmember G.
Guerrero, Safdari, Schmidt.
Thank you. Councilmember Howard.
Rick Hunter, Brian Jaffe, and Ernie Schmidt.
Thank you. Councilmember Mazer.
Guerrero, Safdari, and Rick Hunter.
Councilmember Aguirre.
Ms. Guerrero, Mr. Safardi, and Mr. Schmidt.
Vice Mayor Bain.
Connie Guerrero, Rick Hunter, and Ernie Schmidt.
Mayor Siebert.
Connie Guerrero, Mohammed Safdari, and Ernie Schmidt.
Thank you. And the appointees to the Planning Commission are Ernie Schmidt, Mohammed Safari, and Connie Guerrero. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you to all. We say this every time, but I do mean this. We get a tremendous amount of interest, especially this year. There's been a tremendous amount of interest, but in many years of the opportunities. And the boards, commissions, and committees are not the only place to serve. They're a great place. We have a number of them. I think we'll be starting a recruitment up again. We have an opening coming up.
For tomorrow for the historic resources.
Right, for the historic resources, thank you. And that is appointed by the Planning Commission, a little bit different than this one, but it's the same process. But it's not the only place. There are a number of other places to get plugged in the city, and one is not to be that over another one. There are people who have served on community advisory groups. There are things going on around the city. And so, I mean, the best way to get plugged in is to get in touch with us and ask us, it's interesting to ask us our story. Many of us served on boards, commissions, and committees. Many of us were not appointed. I was appointed the third time around after 2 tries without getting appointed. So I just hope that you'll stay engaged and you'll find a place to plug in. The community is full of opportunities. Yes.
If I could
Vice Mayor Bain.
Thank you. Just briefly, I was one of those people who was not appointed the first time I applied for a commission, and I think many of us can relate to that. So congratulations to those of you who won. I'm sure you'll do a great job for us. And if you didn't win, come back and reapply. I can tell you quite honestly, this was a very difficult decision for us. A lot of really great candidates. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Vice.
Mayor Siebert, I would echo Councilmember Mazur's ask of the council to take a look at this and to spell out whatever we want to do as a council ahead of time for the applicant pool. And one of the phenomena that in one of my other agencies I'm working on includes the number of boards and commissioners that can work for the same company that are sitting on the same board. We're faced with that on another board. Saying we've got 12 members and 4 of them work for one large employer. And if an item came before, that already decimates that from a quorum standpoint. So, as the council or whatever committee looks at it, there's a whole wide spectrum of issues to take a look at. Because if it's, for example, a 5-member commission and 3 members work for the same company, 2 people don't constitute a quorum if they have to recuse themselves. And so there's a lot of things to look at, whatever the right committee is that takes a look at this. So thank you.
Okay, we'll take that. Okay, moving on to our next item is item 8C, and this is the child care supply study gap and facility shortage. And I believe I'd like to introduce, yes, Kristen Anderson to present the report. Been seeing you at a meeting for a while. It is always wonderful to see you. And Kristen is, I'm going to just open with this. Kristen will not tell us this in her comments, but is literally a leading expert on this subject. So I'm excited to hear your staff report on this. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Siebert and council members. The shortage of facility space to house new child care and preschool programs has been a barrier in our community for many years. Over the past decades, we've worked with community partners to make use of appropriate and affordable space in churches, schools, and community centers. And since the shortage has recently become a county-wide problem, the County Human Services Agency contracted with Breon Economics to conduct a county-wide early learning facilities needs assessment to assess the supply gaps and facilities development challenges. And so we decided to piggyback on the county study to have Breon complete additional work. So I'm going to introduce Joanne Breon of Breon Economics, who will present the findings from this study. And then I'll talk about recommendations from staff. Joanne is an urban economist whose team does fiscal and economic analyses for cities, developers, and employers. She also has unique expertise in child care needs assessment and developer impact fees.
Thank you, Kristen. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, I'm really pleased to be here tonight to make this presentation. Let me find my clicker. So, as Kristen mentioned, we just completed a countywide study of child care needs in the county, and we took that analysis and expanded it for Redwood City and conducted a needs assessment of all age groups. So the purpose of the study was to evaluate the demand for child care for infants, preschoolers, and school age, and the age breakdowns are presented. And then we also evaluated the existing supply as of 2015. And then we prepared demand estimates or need estimates for 2015 and then 10 years from now. And then 2 subsets of the demand that we looked at was the need for subsidized child care, and those are families making less than $48,000 a year for a family of 4. And then also the estimate of demand from employees who work in Redwood City but reside outside the county. So the summary of findings for the supply and demand analysis for 2015, we have almost 15,000 children who live in the city. We have 111 family child care home providers and 46 formal child care centers. And there's demand for about 78,000 child care spaces, what we call licensed child care spaces. The breakdown by age group is shown. And then this 7,800 spaces also includes demand from employees. And the employee demand is a much smaller subset than residential demand. Currently, there's a shortage of 1,105 childcare spaces, breaking down again 225 infants, 522 preschool spaces, 358 school-age spaces. So one measure that I like to report that's easy to wrap your head around is currently the existing supply of licensed childcare spaces meets about 86% of the need in the city. The demand from employees, we have about 57,000 employees according to city data. We have who work in the city. At 2025, that's expected to increase significantly, 24% increase to 71,000. 48% of the employees that work in the city reside outside the county. We are assuming 3% of those employees would require some sort of child care. And that need is focused on infants and preschoolers. So 331 infant spaces and almost 500 preschool spaces. This chart is a little dense, but it breaks down the supply and demand graphically, and it shows the shortages by age group. Again, the 1,105 spaces are needed currently and not available. This chart presents a similar analysis, but just focused on those children needing subsidized care. And it's hard for me to read that, but it's almost 1,000 spaces are needed for school age, 123 for preschool, and 616 infant care spaces. What we looked at was the projected development growth in Redwood City, and we estimate there'll be almost 5,500 new residents over the next 10 years, and children 0 to 12 will increase by almost 1,000 in the city. So that'll create a need for over 1,000 infant care spaces, 12% increase, a 9% increase in preschool spaces, and a 6.5% increase in school age spaces for a shortfall of almost 1,800 spaces by 2025. So that measure that I presented for 2015, which was 86%, if there's no new supply added to the city, that measure will drop down to 79%. So as Kristen mentioned, our countywide study looked at, aside from doing a similar sort of needs assessment, we did a very focused site assessment and financing strategy study countywide. So I'm just going to highlight some of the findings of that study for you. We did a focused analysis of 7 sites in the county, and here's a list of them. St. Anthony's Church is in North Fair Oaks, which is in the SOI for Redwood City, and also Kanata College is in Redwood City. A few of these sites, including number 5, Kanata College, was eliminated during the research, and so we didn't get too far on that side. The college district decided they needed the building for another use. So we really drilled down on these sites and looked at all sorts of issues facing these sites and what it would take to actually develop a child care center. And we did a assessment, the pros and cons of each one. And so we have some findings here about, what are some of the challenges that child care faces. And here's 9 challenges. Cost and funding, of course, is always at the top. Building codes are a challenge. Zoning and permit time frames are a big issue, how long it takes. State licensing and outdoor space needs. Often the site can accommodate the interior space, but not the outdoor play space. One of the big challenges is also there's often multiple entities or agencies involved in the approvals and difficult to coordinate. Just the lack of available land in the county, given the growth that's occurring in the county and the competition for commercial space in particular. School districts and faith-based organizations seem to offer the best options for child care providers and are more interested and willing to try and work with child care providers and make projects work. There's very strong interest in high need, but again, these other challenges are very, very prominent. And then also neighborhood opposition kept coming up over and over again. That's just very difficult for child care providers. And I know probably Kristen has talked about this in the past, but child care as a business doesn't make profit like normal businesses. I mean, 85% of their operating expenses are labor, and there's very little money left over for things like rent and facilities and land and all of that sort of thing. So they operate on a really, really tight margin, and salaries are very low. And so to field all these different kind of challenges is very, very difficult for providers. So one of the things that I tried to do in this countywide study was look at childcare the way we look at all sorts of public facilities, and decided to develop like a capital improvement plan. And so we looked at all the need, and we looked at recent projects, 13 recent projects in the Bay Area, and we came up with cost estimates and for each type of facility setting that might occur. So new building construction, new or existing commercial space, expansions at existing centers, the use of portable buildings, which often occur at schools, and then employer-based centers. And when we take an average of all those types of construction, we came up with a cost of $40,700 per childcare space, and that includes indoor and outdoor space costs. So trying to present that cost, which seems really, really high, but if you look at it, childcare space may last 30 years, and that could serve 7.5 children over that 30 years at an average cost of about $5,400 per child. So it's pretty cost effective when you think of what it provides for that child and that family. So one of the other things that we did in this study is we looked at a variety of financing mechanisms that could be used to finance new child care facilities. We looked at sales tax add-on, like Measure A. We looked at parcel taxes, developer impact fees, employer-based care, grants and foundations. There is a state revolving loan fund with low interest loans, community benefit programs. I know Redwood City has a community benefits program, and then development agreements for larger projects. So in our countywide study, there's a kind of in-depth discussion of each of these mechanisms, and also estimates, quantification of what some of these mechanisms might actually be, like a developer impact fee or parcel tax. And then, Kristen, you're going to talk about this new initiative.
So I'm just going to quickly mention this new initiative that's being planned countywide called Build Up for San Mateo County's Children. You'll be hearing about it more in the future. And there are a number of partners at First Five San Mateo County, the Office of Education, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the County of San Mateo, all working on it to lead the facilities advocacy work, including a goal to support cities' efforts to address shortages. Okay, so these are recommendations that we as staff are bringing to the council for consideration. Adding child care facilities specifically to community benefits consideration, encouraging state legislators to study CEQA exemptions for child care centers in certain locations, studying the reuse of existing city facilities as appropriate in the future, engaging with 2+2+2 city council and district meetings to discuss child care possibilities on school properties, and then other open-ended suggestions such as pursuing other strategies related to planning, financing, site identification, or appointing an ad hoc committee to continue working on this. So that concludes our presentation.
Okay, great. Council, we actually don't clap. It seemed I wanted to clap. She did a great job. Appreciate that. Yeah. Council comments, questions? Just jump right in. Councilwoman Borgens.
Thank you. Thank you for this report. This is exciting to see that we have some opportunities and we have some wiggle room here. For a long time, there was kind of a little wobbly road. So I'm glad to see us moving forward. When we talk about the study the reuse of existing city facilities. So I had a suggestion that, I don't know if it's on your radar, but I know the PAL building has before brought forth a child care proposal, and they actually are pretty ready to become a child care facility. And I think there was a little pushback the first time they did it. They currently have a new director, Ivan Reyes Martinez, who they just brought on board, and I'm sure they're going to be ready to move forward again. I think it's a great opportunity for taking a city building and kind of utilizing it better than what it currently is being used as. And I think with the new leadership, we're going to see some great opportunities there. So I'd like to see that thought moving forward. I also had the opportunity this afternoon, I sit on the Salvation Army board, and they are also looking at providing child care on their facility, after school programs involving music and homework studies. Basically, they would start reaching out to specific schools to start with, because they do a bilingual program. So I think there's an opportunity to kind of knock at their door and see, what opportunity is there. And yeah, at the PAL building, they can actually accommodate 36 kids. They actually got their approvals for that. So I'd like to see that revisited. And let's see. And then the YMCA building, the old YMCA building, I think I saw that in one of the reports, that there could be an opportunity with that building to possibly also use it as child care. So I think it's important as we move forward to look at both those that may be coming into our community that need it, those that live here that need it, and then the opportunity for scholarships, and to blend those two to find out if there are nonprofits that can provide so many scholarships for those who need help, because childcare is extremely expensive. And then with the CEQA, excuse me, with the CEQA exemptions, the only thing I would be concerned about would be to make sure that the state and federal laws or any of those safety things were not included in any of the CEQA exemption. I just want to make sure that we keep that level. We don't want to lower the bar when it comes to caring for our children. So anytime I hear CEQA, I get a little nervous about lowering the standard. So I just want to make sure that we're not doing that.
Councilmember G.
Thank you, Mayor Siebert. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Just wanted to help me understand a little bit more. You presented benchmarks. I think it was 86% right now, and in status quo, it goes down to 79% in 10 years. What are other cities doing that are best in class? I mean, is it 100% an aspiration? Is 95% reality? What kind of benchmark are we striving for? I mean, ideally, we'd get it 100%, but is anybody doing 100%?
Well, I've worked in a few cities that are close, but I want to clarify, I didn't get too much into the methodology. Okay. So we look at all children to start, then we look at children with working parents, so that reduces the population a bit. Like labor force participation rate could be like 65%, 72%. And then from there, we have another factor that we apply, which is the demand for licensed care, because we know some families use family members or unlicensed providers or whatnot. So at the end of the day, we might really be estimating the need as like 1 out of 3 children need licensed care when you further reduce it. So 86% sounds like, oh, you're almost at 100%, but again, it's not every single child. But 86, you're doing a good job, I think. In particular, preschool is usually higher. That ratio is higher. Infant care is really expensive, and school age care is challenging because it's morning and afternoon. So you have fewer providers in those two markets by age group. But you're doing a good job, and so the point is that if you're not taking proactive role in trying to increase supply over time, that ratio goes down.
Great. Well, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
The second question I have is, in the report and in your presentation, you talked about capital costs for spaces. But I may have missed it. Is there an operating cost slide, or is it sort of we build it and provide the space, the providers will come? I wasn't able to connect those two together because it does cost a provider to provide the service.
Yeah, this study and the purpose of doing it is the focus on the facilities issue, because there are things going on. For example, the state has put out new state preschool operational subsidy money for a few years every year, and I understand there will be an increase in the new state budget, but no agencies in Redwood City apply for that, and that provides the operational subsidy to serve low-income families, and we can't capture that anymore. So that's one issue. Then there are other operators who may be able to bring some money to the table and serve parents who can afford to pay. And there are some child care centers that serve those families who have hundreds of children on the waiting list. The Shores Child Care Center, for one, has about 600 children right now on the waiting list. So there are those other pieces of the problem: the operational subsidy, the workforce issues, the fact that teachers are paid very little when all of the funding comes from the pockets of the parents. So countywide and statewide, we work with other groups on those other pieces of the puzzle. But the facility issue is so much more tied to land use and community development and housing and transportation and how parents get from home to work and so on. So that's why this focus.
Great, thank you. And speaking of land use, it was great that you have the slide here. Could you take a moment to just kind of share what your thoughts are about CEQA exemptions? It was in the report that is a challenge, but I'm not sure what you're looking for. If we were to say to an assembly member, help us out a little bit, what would we be asking for?
I'm going to let Aaron answer this one.
Come on, Kristen, you're a land use person now, too.
I think that's something we'll have to discuss. I think one thing that comes off at the top of my head is we have certain places within Redwood City and around the state that are already approved for places of assembly. Would we look at certain land use locations to where they don't have to go through the whole CEQA analysis and they're categorically exempt from it? But I think that's some type of study we'd have to do, but that's one thing off the top of my head I could think of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Aguirre.
Thank you for the report, Ms. Brian and Kristen. I've heard that many of the startup companies, IT companies, are really looking into doing this for their employers, Facebook and others. And that's not on the list here, and that's a great source of income in trying to partner with them. Have we done anything to look beyond these areas into more profitable organizations that might be able to help subsidize the need that we have, which is huge? And I look forward to the day that we can open it up back at Kenyatta College at some point, because I know that the need not only for staff, faculty, students, but just the community at large. But have we done anything beyond these that are, typical, that are subsidized and so on? Have we done anything in the private sector?
You mean in terms of providing facilities or
facilities, partnering with you, being part of this, wish list that you have here?
Well, So in the countywide study, we did look at how many current employer-based centers or providers there are. In that provision of childcare can take a lot of forms. They can provide physical space. They can provide subsidies to their employees, or they can reserve a certain block of spaces at an existing private licensed center. They can contract with a corporate childcare provider. So there's lots of different ways. So in the countywide study, we did profile a number of large employer-based childcare centers and how they operate. In the Redwood City study, we didn't delve deeper, but that would be like some follow-on work that Kristen could do with the city, is look at some potential opportunities with Redwood City employers to see if they're willing or interested. So I would recommend that for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of the problems is that that employers generally have to be fairly large to have the 3% of their employees be a large enough number to constitute a center. So the county provides a center here that serves both the employees and the community families. Electronic Arts Center in Redwood Shores is open only to their employees, and Oracle pays to reserve the majority of the spaces in the Shores Child Care Center in Redwood Shores. But it's difficult to get a lot of small employers together to jointly support.
But these millennials are going to have babies, and they're all working in these buildings, and they're going to want to work in and have their children in diverse, child care centers that partner with the county and do that. I know the county is great. There's a place for their county employees. Not every employer can do that. But as we look forward, I'd like to make sure we add that to the list.
Councilman Mazur.
Thank you. So thank you for the study. I've been looking forward to this. I had a couple of questions and some comments. You provided us with some numbers on shortages and how many spaces were short, et cetera. And I know that was from a facilities planning perspective. And wondering, having not in the too distant past had to think about childcare for my own children, wondering, what do we know about what families are doing who can't access childcare facilities, whether it's after school or preschool or infant care? Do we know anything?
I'm not aware of formal research on it. I know from experience and with many other colleagues' experiences and talking with parents that there are a lot of informal patchwork arrangements that people do. We're using relatives, taking children to grandparents across the bay, whatever the split shifts with one parent choosing to work nights so that they can trade off and not have that expense.
I mean, one of the reasons I am asking that question is because if we sort of think about childcare and access to childcare as an economic development issue, I think it sort of helps us reframe the value and importance of people having access to childcare and having the ability to go to work and not have to worry about what's happening with their kids, not have to drive across the bay to get to their grandmother or whoever that they're going to leave their child with. I recently had an employee who would drive to San Mateo. He worked in Redwood City, lived in Redwood City, but drove to San Mateo to take his child to childcare and then came back to Redwood City. So those kinds of things, I think, are exactly what make it difficult for people, even when they have an alternative to leave kids with family. So a couple of thoughts. One is, I appreciated the age breakdown, and I think as we think about facilities, it's very different in terms of how we address facilities needs for infant care for preschool and for school age care, and who our potential partners might be in each of those areas of ages are different, I would think. Do you think that's true, Kristen? And so I think for me, it's easier to sort of break down by the different age groups as we think about what are our next steps as a council, as we think about what's possible for us as a city. So if I think about the school age care, take that first. In the 2x2x2, or somebody called it the other day 6, but that doesn't really work out because it's not an addition, it's time. So anyway, yeah, exactly. We have been talking about access to childcare quite a bit, and just a couple of things to know, which I think you already know. The Sequoia Union High School District has identified childcare for its employees as a critical need. They have a lot of young teachers who've recently had children and are coming back to work, but are having problems with childcare. So what they have done is they're placing a portable at Carlmont High School. So it's providing infant care for their employees. So that sort of started our conversation in there. And so we talked about what might be possible in the future in terms of identifying sites on other school properties. For Redwood City, we talked about the Redwood High School site, which is already a licensed preschool and infant care facility, right? It does both?
Infant toddler.
It's just infant toddler. And their numbers are quite low because that was originally envisioned for parenting teens, and thankfully our teen birth rates have dropped significantly, and so they have low numbers there, and so there's a possibility there. So if we think about some of our school partners, I think it's an issue. I think, I don't know what you think, Diane, because you are on that committee with me, but we should continue to work with the school district in terms of that, as well as the preschool. As you know, Redwood City School District has a pretty extensive preschool program. The school district talks about itself as a pre-K to 8 district. And in fact, when I was on the board, we sort of made that official determination that that's how we were going to talk about ourselves as a district. And I know, as we've noted here at the dais, that they are experiencing declining enrollment, in particular due to families moving out of the city because of housing costs. And I know they're very open to discussing with us what might be possible in terms of converting some eligible classrooms into preschool sites. So I would like, in terms of these recommendations, I would like to, in particular, make sure that we keep having that discussion and come up with some potentially creative ideas that we might need to bring back to council after some further conversations. The after-school problem is actually quite a complex challenge, and when I think about it not as much as a facilities challenge, because mostly the schools have the ability to open up their classrooms after school, but more in terms of funding. So some of you may know that the state funds after school at a fairly high level across the state. California invests more in after school than all the other states combined. However, the reimbursement rates for providers have been low and set at the same rate since 2000, whatever the year it is, Prop 49 passed. The legislature has in its budget this year, just came out of conference committee the other night, that they're increasing those rates. So hopefully it will make it possible for after-school providers to stay in business and to have more slots accessible for families who can't pay full price. But I think that on that issue, it's less of a facilities issue and more of a, are there providers available? Are there enough people to staff it? And I know for the city, we do quite a bit of work through Parks, Recs, and Community Services, working with the school district to provide after school. Although we may be challenged if the president's budget holds and 21st century community learning centers are eliminated. So that would be a different discussion and not about facilities. The other couple of comments I wanted to make. One is you talked about neighborhoods not being super excited about having child care facilities located in the neighborhoods. And, you know, I think that one of the challenges is a challenge that we hear in a variety of areas, and that's traffic. If you have even if you only have 15 kids in your home, which is kind of large actually for a family provider, but if you have cars going in and out, it can be disruptive to a neighborhood. So if we were going to think about how do we support more family child care providers to exist, I think we would need to continue to think about traffic and the impacts of traffic on those neighborhoods where those providers exist. Then on the child care impact fee, didn't South San Francisco adopt a child care impact fee many years ago, like more than 15 years ago? Would we have, if we were to do something like that, would we have to do a nexus study?
Yes. Joanne did the nexus study for the South San Francisco one.
And Kristen helped me.
Oh, I don't know why I'm turning to them. I should just be asking you guys.
So yeah, we've been working on this for a long time.
So, how many other cities have child care impact fees on the peninsula? San Francisco has one also, don't they?
Mateo, the city of San Mateo.
Only on commercial.
On commercial.
And
South San Francisco, but then there's Palm Desert. I did one in Palm Desert. I did work on the San Francisco one, and then that was before the recession, and then they finally adopted it in 2013. Contra Costa County has a facility or a facilities assessment requirement, but not an impact fee. It's like case by case basis. So there's a variety of types of fees out there. City of Berkeley has one that was pre AB 1600. So they use the money for a variety of things, not just facilities. So I'm drawing a blank on.
That's fine. I was just trying to get a sense.
Santa Monica has done a lot of work on child care impact fees too.
So for me, I am interested in what it would take to do a nexus study. I don't know if we have the capacity to do that right now, but I am interested. I had actually attended a presentation several months ago and had a little note to myself around child care impact fees. But in the meantime, I think an interim step we could do is at this number one, which is just adding child care facilities to consideration as we work with developers around community benefits, that it's an optional or something that they could think about and provide. I think those were all of my extensive comments and questions. But I want to just thank you again for bringing this to us, and I'll look forward to continuing to work on this issue.
Councilwoman Howard?
Thank you, Mayor Siebert. I'm not sure everyone's aware, but I think it's very much worth mentioning that Redwood City is the only city in this area that has a child care coordinator, as well as a child care policy. And we began that 15 years ago, maybe. I just know that it's truly unique. And Kristen Anderson has been offering her services throughout the peninsula because what you offer, no one else does. So I want to thank you for that, Kristen, because you've been an invaluable resource. And I really appreciate this study. Ms. Brion, thank you very much for both you and Kristen's input on this. Really, really appreciate it. It's opened up a whole avenue of possibility and questions, and I'm glad we're having this discussion tonight. I wanted to go back to our meeting with the elementary and the high school district that Councilmember Mazur mentioned that we serve on, along with our city manager, Melissa Stevenson-Diaz. That the conversation has always been around we can't attract or keep good teachers, and it's really a struggle, and it's always been around the conversation of housing. It's been for a long time. But I think that it's starting to shift, and I'm really glad to see that because I think the school districts are beginning to understand they've got a great possibility here of offering something that maybe other school districts aren't, which is the possibility of offering childcare. And it doesn't mean they do the childcare, and we've had these discussions. You have an operator, you need to provide the facility space. But there's an opportunity here for the school districts to really look at their inventory and see where there's space that can be made available for our precious resources, which is our children, And this, I would imagine, would be a great incentive for a teacher who wants to have their children nearby while they're working. And if something comes up, they can go right nearby or even on the same property. So if the school districts can do both, housing and school and childcare, marvelous. But it's cheaper to do the childcare for them, and they recognize that. The housing costs so much more per unit than it would be to do the childcare space. So I'd really like us to continue working with the schools and furthering that conversation so that we can see how we can help them, and I'm not sure how, but help them see, and I think they already do, the resource they have right within their grasp. Also, we talk about CEQA and other restrictions. The school district has less restrictions on them when it comes to building. I mean, let's recognize that. That is a real asset for them. And they may be able to put something into place a lot more quickly than we can. So again, I'd like to see us continue talking with them and moving these conversations forward and see how we can increase the number of child care spaces in Redwood City. I know it was mentioned, and I agree that we should be leveraging our opportunities with new development and definitely working with large employers to participate in or actually provide it within their property, the child care that's necessary. Because recognizing a lot of these employees come in possibly from far away, and what a wonderful advantage it would be if they could have their child care on site or nearby. Again, another draw for a company I would think be willing to pay for. Our faith-based communities, I don't see that we're doing any active discussions with them at this time, but if we are, I just didn't see that. But it's not a conversation we shouldn't have. And I'm not sure where we begin, but I think it's worth having that we sit down and talk to them and say, how's your space being utilized? Are you feeling the crunch of the people who attend your synagogue, your church, your organization? And maybe we'll be able to, like Tapestry Church did, provide daycare or childcare on site. I wanted to know what kind of benefits or incentives can we give developers that we're giving incentives already to developers. Do you have any thoughts and ideas on what additional incentives we could offer that would make it more enticing for developers to start thinking outside the box as far as childcare? Or if, I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's something we should think about because we do offer a great deal of incentive, but what would be something that's such a carrot, they would say, wow, I didn't think about it, but maybe I would.
Density bonus is a big one. And there is state legislation around affordable housing, similar to affordable housing, you know, if you provide childcare. I believe we looked at that a long time ago in 2002, and hardly anyone had taken advantage of that. But fee waivers on the childcare space portion or fee reductions could be one incentive. I think the community benefit program is really strong. The developer doesn't have to provide the center themselves or build it. They can provide funding towards another project that's struggling, so some gap funding. What else? In terms of incentives, I mean, just make it a requirement. That's always a big incentive. It's not an incentive, but you know what I mean? Just put more teeth in it,
That's that more than an incentive,
that project, this is an issue that we care about, and we're going to look more favorably on projects that come up with a plan to address this issue.
And I do like the suggestion. I really appreciate that you have given us food for thought on how we can move forward with this. And I think looking at our own city buildings and existing land is certainly an opportunity we should look at. And on Hudson, the YMCA building, don't know exactly what the future of that will be, but there's another possible opportunity right next to a park that really could be incorporated, and you wouldn't have to create new outdoor space. It's something that really might have possibility. I think that was all I had. But I would like to add childcare to our community benefits consideration, recognizing that developers are putting money into this and their impact with their employees who bring children into our community is great. And so there's a way of building that pot of money so that we can do more good as far as childcare. It's not the only thing under our benefits plan, but I think it could certainly be a portion, and I don't know what that percentage would be, but it's certainly money we could utilize and leverage with other monies. I think that would be it, but thank you.
Vice Mayor Bain.
Thank you both. This has been a really thought-provoking discussion, especially as I'm hearing my colleagues talk about some solutioning. It's really good to get the numbers and see exactly how we're doing, so we have a baseline and we can look back in hopefully a few years and close that gap to the extent that we can. I was going to ask something along the lines of what Councilmember G asked in terms of the best practices, and I heard some examples from South San Francisco, San Mateo, Palm Desert, and then I was also going to ask along the lines of what Councilmember Howard was just asking on developers and what we can do to work with them to help us with this issue. But those questions, those were answered largely. I think that small groups can do a lot to kind of work through a lot of those issues, look at best practices, and bring together a package of recommendations to the full council, which is how I would suggest that we proceed, either through the 2x2 committee or 2x2x2, the 8 committee, or through an ad hoc committee, which I suppose could be comprised of the same people who are on the 2x2. So, but I would suggest that we figure out what the right combination of people is. There are certainly members of this council who are much more knowledgeable than me, although I of course had to have my kids in childcare when they were little, so I have a little experience with that. But I'd be happy to help wherever I can. But I think that we can have a small group come back with a handful of recommendations that we could consider how we move forward on this. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Kristen, thank you, and thank you both for bringing this. A couple of comments. One, the council has done a lot of work. It was mentioned earlier that I know the Planning Commission, when I was there, did a lot of work on the home care. I believe we essentially have child care by right for residential areas, we loosened those up, including the fees. Just recently, cutting all the fees that they pay for that. The interesting slide that you told me, and I know about this because I've worked in a significant child care facility, a congregation that used a significant amount of their space for child care during the week, but was the slide that you showed that really the target market are schools and congregations, especially because schools, because they're kind of already geared to have children there, as are most congregations. And I know that there's a number that exists. So as I started to kind of mix all this together, and I really like something that Vice Mayor Bain just alluded to, and that is this idea of having a group kind of begin to tackle this. And here's where I think it lies on the biggest chunk of this, and that is I would love to see, and I'm not going to suggest that I don't want to task the 2x2x2 committee with this, but if you would consider this, and that is holding a World Cafe town hall type event where we bring the schools and the congregations together from around Redwood City to a place where they can just all have a conversation together. If the 2x2x2 could be the kind of sponsor of that and kind of help with that, if there's some things needed, I'm sure that we can come up with a facility. I'm sure we can come up with some facilitation through PCRC and other things. But to me, if we can get the minds together from the school districts, from the congregations in this community, we can invite them with a letter. I'd be happy to sign a letter. We could do that with the superintendent, with the presidents of the school board. I don't know what it'll take, but I think we can get people together in a room and begin to talk about what's next. And to me, that's more powerful than an ad hoc committee of the council, and here's why. This is, and I'm not suggesting you're saying this, but this is not a Redwood City issue. This is a community issue, and the greatest opportunity lies with our schools and with our congregations. And if the city, with our leadership, can help facilitate that conversation, then I think that group can act as the ad hoc, and I would love to see what comes out of that. And so that's one point is I'd like to, if the 2x2x2 would take that, discuss it with the schools, we can get a way to get the congregations out. We can do a great event. We can, do food and that kind of thing.
We can put it on the next agenda.
That'd be great. Thank you. To a couple of these other points, happy to have it come back up under community benefits. We can talk about that in the future. Whether it fits in there, that can certainly come back up when community benefits come back to us. In terms of CEQA, I'm always looking to reform CEQA, man. All you got to do is put reform CEQA and we're there. My favorite subject. If we could actually, and Kristen, I'm going to ask you to task you on this. If you could contact me, if we can get together and see what a letter, it could start with a letter. I'd be happy to write a letter. If I can get some specifics about what that looks like, we can get together with Aaron briefly and just get some ideas around what that looks like and start with, we think there needs to be some CEQA reform about this. It won't be the first time the state legislatures have heard from me specifically about CEQA reform. They only need to attend the Progress Seminar to hear it every year. But I think we can do that. Again, the study of city facilities, engaging the 2+2, pursue some other strategy in this committee, I think can come together. And I'm looking for it to be a powerful event where we come out of that event with some direction for the various organizations, the congregations, the schools, the city, and the community as a whole. So I think we need to get this out to the community and see how the community wants to solve this issue. And so those are some directions that we can leave it at for now. We'll continue to work on it. I appreciate it. Interestingly enough, this got not that it should have been off my radar, and that it wasn't necessarily off my radar, but the very first Redwood City Conversations event that was held at the big one at the Fox Forum this year, I was listening to the different ideas and just meandering around, and one person reported out the issue of affordable child care. And it immediately, I said that is something we've gotten away from. And not that we've gotten away from it like we purposely did. It just hasn't been part of our conversations. And I believe it's something we do need to address. So through some of the strategies I just laid out, we'll continue to get this before us and before the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we are on to item 8D, which is I'm sure the reason you're all here. Maybe not. And the fiscal year 17-18 budget study session and setting the date for the public hearing and adoption of the budget. And I will preface this by saying a lot of conversation of this council has gone into this, and a lot of staff work has gone into this. So I appreciate that. This is not the beginning, but nearing the end of a very in-depth process. And I want to lead off by saying thank you to my colleagues for all the work that we've done, including all the way back to the mid-year budget update, but also to our staff under the direction of our city manager, Melissa Stevenson-Diaz, who will present the staff report along with Kimbra. And just really want to thank you for all the work that goes into this. I know it's not the most popular public but it is by far the one issue that if we don't manage this well, we won't be talking about having child care meetings or libraries or anything else. So I want to thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I actually want to also start by thanking the staff, probably that whole section of the room over there. They're a subset of all the people who have been involved in producing this year's budget. And as you know, we've made some efforts this year to really strengthen the amount of information that's provided and put it in a format that may be more accessible to you, but certainly to the public. And so I'm very grateful to them for all of their work, and particularly when it came on top of a year that we were amping up and doing a 5-year CIP. So it's been a big year for money and for presentation of money. So thank you. So briefly, just before you is the presentation overview, and Kimbra will be handling the first 3 topics to really talk in a little more detail about the process we've been through, describe and highlight the economic conditions and forecasts that we believe are ahead of us, and as well talk in a little more detail about the recommended budget highlights. And then I'll pick it up from there and talk more about the strategy going forward over the 5-year period, talk about very briefly our capital program and enterprise funds, and then circle back on a couple of policy topics that were identified by the City Council earlier this spring. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kimbra McCarthy, our Assistant City Manager for Administrative Services.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. As you know, beginning in February, we took several steps leading to consideration of the recommended budget before you this evening. And this slide just shows the key dates and activities that have led to development of the budget. And it is guided by the overarching budget principles that you set previously, which include relying on ongoing revenue to fund ongoing expenses, using one-time revenues to fund one-time expenses, and paying down long-term liabilities, and then also ensuring adequate reserves. So on this next slide, it talks a little bit about the strengths and threats that are included in the recommended budget, and I do want to spend just a little bit of time going into detail on the strengths and threats that we do have before us. So for our strengths, the city's unemployment rate is 2.7%, which is considered full employment. We have the 9th highest per capita personal income among California's largest cities at about $52,000. We've also experienced a growth in property taxes citywide and a disproportionate rise in home values for cities' homeowners compared to the rest of the county. Property tax revenue growth in the downtown district has increased by approximately 102% since fiscal year 12-13, and TOT revenue is projected to increase by about 1% in 17-18. Future TOT is expected to increase slightly, primarily due to the opening of a new hotel this spring. So potential threats include changes in federal policies. The city could be adversely affected if there's a change in federal funding to CDBG or home formulas, and that amounts to approximately $900,000 in revenue that is included in the 17-18 budget. We also have funding of approximately $125,000 for the Community-Oriented Policing Services Grant, which is also known as the COPS grant. That could be affected if federal funding changes. The city's ability to adapt to broader climate, economic, and social changes will also shape our ability to maintain economic vitality and meet the interests of our community. Concerns about sea level rise, as well as changing retail, mobility, and housing interests, all have an impact on future revenues and could adversely affect the city's budget. We also cannot count on receiving excess ERA funding year after year. This revenue stream continues to be vulnerable both to state manipulation and a reduction in the availability of funds. As school spending caps increase, the pool available for refunds to San Mateo County cities decreases. For sales tax, residents are spending more of their disposable income on non-taxable items than before, like housing, medical care, and education. The growing trend of online purchasing also impacts our revenue, as does changing consumer preferences. For example, younger millennials are tending to spend more of their money on experiences rather than purchasing goods. And finally, as was mentioned at the May 22nd meeting, the city's pension costs are expected to rise significantly over the next 30 years to pay off our unfunded liability. The unfunded liability for pension benefits is about $255 million as of the end of this fiscal year, and the unfunded actuarial accrued liability for OPEB, or retiree health benefits, is about $58 million. So that's approximately, well, it's over $300 million. So in order to fund pension obligations, employer contributions are relied upon even more. This council provided direction on May 22nd to establish a pension trust to moderate these cost increases and set aside payments. And then I briefly want to talk about the 5-year forecast, which is also included in your budget document. So it has changed a little bit since the February study session presentation. Since then, you approved user fee increases for community development, fire, and police, which is estimated to bring approximately $2 million more to the budget starting in fiscal year 17-18. The forecast in February showed moderate growth in sales tax revenues until 18-19. Now we're forecasting that sales tax revenue will remain flat in 17-18. We also projected a flattening in the TOT revenue stream, but as I mentioned, we are now projecting a modest 1% growth in fiscal year 17-18. And then I also want to note that downturn is not included in the forecast. Although local economists are not forecasting this downturn during next fiscal year, there are several factors that are indicating that a slowing of the economy is occurring. So we do anticipate a flattening of future revenues. So this next slide is just an overview of the recommended budget for all funds, which is $267.2 million. The city's largest revenue fund is a general fund, which makes up about 49% or $131.6 million of the city's total revenue stream. The two largest revenue categories are property tax, which is about $48 million or 36.2% of all revenues, and sales tax, which is $23 million or 17.5% of all revenues. For expenditures, the total budget for all funds is $267 million. The general fund budget is about $117.8 million. And as expected, salaries, wages, and benefits make up about 74% of the general fund expenditure budget, about $87 million. So this budget was developed with a focus on maintaining the long-term fiscal health of the city and preparing for future financial challenges. Key provisions of the recommended budget include full funding for each department based upon currently anticipated services and actual expenses over the last few years. We also moved 7.9 FTEs from the Capital Improvement Fund to the General Fund and other funds in order to more accurately reflect the work that is performed on capital projects instead of operating programs. This move will result in employee cost savings of about $1.5 million in the Capital Improvement Fund, but then there's going to be a decrease in expenses of $1.3 million to the general fund and $200,000 to other funds. This budget does include a few short-term service enhancements that total about $253,000, including a pilot park ranger program, firefighter Spanish language training program, contract staff to assist in fire department projects, funding for community development interns, and funding for new library materials. In terms of ongoing expenditures, there are a few, but $362,000 of the total $441,000 is related to true-ups to reflect actual costs. So those items include actual costs for facilities maintenance and general liability and property insurance, and small enhancements for a property tax consultant and software for administrative services and police. So this concludes the budget overview section. So now I'll turn it over to the city manager to discuss our strategy for balancing the budget over the next 5 years.
So as Kimber described, we approached this year's budget really looking forward and looking toward the future. And as she noted, we really have focused this year on very limited increases that were focused on a one-time basis in order to help us prepare for the work that's ahead. I also do want to call out that with your approval of helping to fund the pension trust using some of our reserves, we are still anticipating and planning through this process to maintain the reserve levels of 15%. So there is a healthy general fund reserve that is always included in and looking forward into the future. But you'll recognize this slide because we used it when we described in some detail the challenges associated with our obligations for pension costs. And it's really just to illustrate again that we do have a lot of work ahead that we need to do together in order to address not only obligations that we have toward employees and toward retirees, but also obligations we have associated with workers' compensation and the commitment we've made to support tenants as we end residential uses at the Docktown Marina. So addressing all of these obligations really has been something you've been working on throughout the entire year. As Kimber mentioned, you have already supported fee increases that have had a substantial increase in new revenues, $2 million. You've given us authority to set aside funds for a pension trust, as Kimber described. I would note that we show in this budget this initial funding of the pension trust. However, next year we'll be recommending to you that we also make contributions from our enterprise funds and our internal funds in addition to the general fund in order to recognize that we have employees in those funds as well as the general fund. And we're likely going to need to keep making contributions to that trust over time. So I want to be clear that that's been a very significant first step that you have authorized us to take, but it is not the last step in terms of pension funding. Additionally, in the coming year, we'll be working on a strategy associated with addressing our retiree health obligations, which are lower but not insignificant. So really don't need to dwell too much on the next slide because we've talked about it in probably agonizing detail now associated with pension obligations. And of course, it's pretty much unreadable from even the first row, I think. But the gist of it is, of course, over time that we are expecting that our annual costs for pensions are going to rise from what we pay now, just shy of $20 million a year, to $33 million a year in just 5 years, and that those costs will go up after that time. So with this slide, I wanted to provide a picture of what it would look like if we only did what we have done so far, and that is to increase revenues to $2 million and set aside funds in the trust. Those have been very important steps, and we're very appreciative of the council's support. What this models is if we did nothing else, the green line is our anticipated growth in expenditures, and the blue line is our growth in anticipated revenues. We are not, as Kimber discussed, actually projecting a decline in revenues, which is something we would fully expect to occur during a recession, but we are projecting a softening in revenues. And if you take both of those projections without making any other adjustments going forward, we would clearly outpace, our expenditures would clearly outpace our revenues beginning the year after next. We would see a deficit of about $1.4 million starting in fiscal year 18-19, and that would grow to over $10 million within the 5-year period. So clearly this was not something that we could recommend to you, and so we do need to suggest some important next steps looking out over the 5-year period. And so that leads us to our recommended budget strategy over the 5-year period, which is that we spend significant staff time and effort in the coming year that will then lead to involving you in finding ways to increase our revenues further. So we have a $6 million positive and $6 million negative plan here. So we want to increase ongoing revenues by a total of $6 million. We would consider the $2 million in new fee revenue as an important step toward that $6 million. But we believe we also need to decrease our ongoing expenditures by $6 million in order to shape the curves that you just saw. And that will require a fair amount of work on the part of staff, and it will also require us being very closely attuned to you and your priorities as we want to make sure that the work we do is exactly focused on the most important needs that you think we have for the community. So if those adjustments can be made, we would then be in a more positive position over the 5-year period. That would allow us to absorb the increases that we know are coming on the pension side and would give us some breathing room to then figure out how we come up the next step of the mountain. But we think that with those meaningful changes, we're well positioned for the time beyond the 5-year period. Briefly, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the recommended capital improvement program for next year. You've had a whole study session on this, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But as you know, the funding for our capital program comes from many sources, including the utility users tax, from fees paid on development projects, and then money set aside from the rates paid by water and sewer users, as well as county funds and grants. But importantly, it is not used property and sales tax. Those funding sources really go to our general operations. So on May 8th, we described all of the projects recommended for the next fiscal year, as well as a dream list for the 5-year period. And you'll recall that our recommendations for next year really are on projects that are already underway or that we would consider non-discretionary and essential. So there's an estimated cost of $38.3 million for the 59 projects that are recommended for fiscal year 17-18. And you'll recall that some of the major projects are the Bayfront Canal project, making progress on design for the Veterans Memorial Center and YMCA project, and Middlefield Road improvements. Of the 10 areas that the CIP covers, transportation has the largest funding need for next year, and nearly $10 million of the total amount goes to transportation-related projects. I also wanted to briefly touch on our water and sewer enterprise funds. Again, those are separate from the general fund, and money that is received from ratepayers is the only source of funding for both our supply of water and for infrastructure needs for both of these enterprises. At this time, both of these funds are healthy, but they do require the incremental rate increases that the City Council has already endorsed. We do have reserves that are set aside to address our planned capital expenditures, and so we are well positioned to take care of updating and improving the delivery system. And that's important to note because, as many of you know, that is not the case in other communities necessarily, and I don't know that it's always historically been the case, but this council has been very disciplined about rate increases and making sure that we're prepared to maintain the infrastructure needs that we have. And then the last major slide that I wanted to raise before we turn it over to you for questions and for feedback are two topics that have arisen over the last year that you asked that we consider using staff time on were adoption of a local minimum wage and a reassessment and review of events at Courthouse Square. And so one of the attachments to the very long budget message at the beginning was an estimate of the amount of staff time that it would take to work on either or both of these projects. And I want to be clear that staff are perfectly happy to work on either of them. But I also wanted to be upfront and acknowledge that they would take some staff time and would require that we would prioritize those above other efforts. So you saw in there that addressing a local minimum wage, we estimate would take in the neighborhood of 900 staff hours. And that's because it would, we think, require a fairly significant amount of public outreach. Because so many cities around us have gone through this process, we're well aware of some of the efforts they have undertaken, and so we can certainly borrow from those activities, but we know that it would take time and effort to do that. The other analysis, which would be to look at Courthouse Square events and do an internal review, really just to assess the balance of public and private events and impacts on businesses when there are closures. That is something that we could do, we think, within staff capacity and not necessarily require a substantial amount of outreach. And so that's under 200 hours, and that's something that we could do if that is of interest to the City Council. So with that, now we finally turn it over to you for questions that you may have about the budget, and then we'll be seeking your feedback on the recommended budget for next year, on the recommended strategy for balancing the budget over the next 5 years, and then particularly whether you would like us to include in our work plans for the coming year pursuit of a local minimum wage and evaluation of Courthouse Square events.
Okay, comments and questions? Who wants to start? Councilwoman Mazur.
Okay, so first of all, as I said to the city manager today, thank you so much for this giant book, for those of you who haven't seen it. It was really, really, really helpful for me. This only being the second budget that I've approved through the city. And this really helped clarify a lot of information that I found really difficult to access last year. So I really appreciate the many, many hours I had to spend with our budget and getting all the details. So thank you so much for putting it together and making it possible not only for us as council members to read, but also for the public to access and sort of understand either at a high level or a detailed level what we were talking about. I think some of you have heard me say before, I look at the budget as a policy document, and it clearly states our values and priorities as a city. And if I look at how we're spending our money, and how we sort of aggregate things, I think, we've placed the highest priority on safety and public safety, with the greatest expenditures going to fire and police combined. But then second, on community through our Parks, Recs, and Community Services and our library services. And if you add some of the work that happens through community development, we've captured a significant amount of our budget in those two areas. And I think given that the council has set out priorities, it really, I think, expresses the values that we've all set forth here at the dais. So thanks for, again, that sort of clarity on it. So I have a couple of questions, and then I will just share one thought. So one of my questions is on some of the, we've talked fairly extensively about the CIP, and so I was just wondering on, for example, the downtown park study. I know we're moving forward with that. I had an opportunity last week to be at the Community Services Committee for the California League of Cities, and we heard a presentation from the Trust for Public Land. And they work with cities specifically on identifying potential places for parks, as well as they bring funding to the table. They're particularly looking at communities where there's more of a scarcity of parks and underserved populations. And I'm wondering, maybe this is a question for you, Chris, I'm not sure, but have we worked with the Trust for Public Land at all before? Are you aware of them? What's your thought about potentially bringing them into that discussion, since it's a big part of it's a fairly significant expenditure in the budget?
Sure. I don't think Rhonda's here, but we had applied for a grant that was for downtown park that was originally here potentially for Roselli Garden, but we wanted to take a look at really the landscape of where we could put parks in downtown. So that's why we're having a consultant, because of lots of the undergrounding issues of utilities, and you know the story with that. So we did have a grant that we received. I think it was $100 and some odd $1,000, and we're using that. For, I believe it was for Linden Park. It's within an area, so we designated that particular funds. But we can work with them again, and we can apply once we know of a particular site down here.
So they supported the Linden Park effort?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember I know we were diverting from here to the community garden, and then I believe there was that reassessment that we met the criteria, and I believe that was the final destination. So I can double check, but I know we were to meet those requirements. They wanted to give us that money, and I believe that's where it ended up last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I was advocating for Redwood City while I was listening to to the presentation, and they had some really interesting discussion about the economic benefit of parks, and they and work that they've done with GIS systems to help cities assess the economic benefits of parks.
Okay.
So I'm happy to share that information with you, and if it's useful.
Perfect. Wednesday, we have our consultant interviews, so we're down to 3, and then we'll mention that to the selected consultant.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And then also, sort of again on this infrastructure piece, one of the recommendations, this is fairly specific, but one of the recommendations is the permanent closure of Middlefield Road, which we talked about, and I think Mayor mentioned, and we all sort of nodded our heads that we want, Theater Way. And no, not all of Middlefield. Yeah, no, not all of Middlefield. That is not what I am recommending. But I'm wondering, I couldn't tell within this budget if there was also some thought about additional. There have been some discussion when we had this last conversation about additional closures in the downtown. Is that within this budget, or is it not? Or what's the status of that?
Since they came, I want to give them the chance to answer the question.
Perfect.
The short answer is yes. As a follow-up to our study session that we had on the Downtown Precise Plan, we're of course going to look at Theater Way and doing the environmental review necessary to do the permanent closure, but we'll also look at other segments in the downtown area as well as other more minor pedestrian and bicycle improvements.
Okay, thank you. And then one of the questions I had asked the city manager earlier today was there was a whole section where it described the different types of revenue and sales tax and what went to the state and what came to the city, and I couldn't understand it until it was explained to me, and I just thought it might be useful if anybody else was looking at this budget document, because there are some pieces where it says local state funds, and then it says local funds sort of in the same box. And I think it was on page 23 of the budget message. So would you mind just explaining that again? Or, I don't know, Kimber, if you want to explain it.
I know you had inquired with our consultant. I don't know if they were able to get an answer.
Yes, so in terms of, and you're referring to page 23 of the budget document, the where sales tax goes chart. So staff is not aware that once the state is given money, how it comes back in terms of extra money or local funding. So we aren't aware of that. And we did reach out to our sales tax consultant, Muni Services, and we haven't heard back from them yet. So I'm happy to share whatever we hear back from them, hopefully by tomorrow. But in terms of the different categories, I'm not really clear on, I guess, the local revenue fund. You're referring to the local revenue fund, the local health and social services, and local public safety. So those are all state categories that I believe they put towards those, that would go towards those different state agencies that fund those services. But I'm not really sure how the money might flow down back to us. So I'll get back to you on that.
Thanks. I think it would just be useful to understand the complexities of the sales tax, since it is one of our major sources of revenue, and how that does come back to us. I'll just put in one other plug for something I heard about at the League of Cities last week, which is a Senate bill that's just gone to the Assembly that has the potential to impact our work here in Redwood City. It's Senate Bill 649, sponsored by WESO, which limits cities' abilities to negotiate on small cell technology. In San Francisco, they were just able to negotiate a fairly successful and complex deal with the wireless providers that allow greater access for their community. So just in case I've had the opportunity to talk to a few of our Assembly members, but if anybody talks to them, you may want to just put in a little plug. The League of Cities is opposing it, and all the large cities are opposing it as well. So everybody's kind of in sync on this from the city's perspective. I think it could impact us and our ability as we think about both infrastructure and revenue as the wireless companies come to us. So the last thing is I'll just respond to the question of minimum wage, and I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody sitting up here because I brought this up originally. I would like to see the city prioritize minimum wage. I recognize that it is an investment of staff time. I think one of the things we heard from our person who did our economic forecast is that minimum wage does have a positive impact on the economy. He was pretty unequivocal in his response when I asked about that. And if we look at a recent report from one of our local housing organizations, they talked about the impact of high housing costs on poverty rates, and that when you consider the housing costs, the poverty rate has doubled in this county. And as I think Councilmember Aguirre said when we first talked about this, if we're going to impact how people live and whether people are able to stay in the city and in this county, we have to look at how are we going to make it possible for them to earn enough money to stay here. I'm not suggesting that raising the minimum wage is going to make it possible to afford the very expensive homes, but at least we could take a step forward and try and move this in faster than the state and help maintain some of the values I think we hold very dearly here in Redwood City. So that's it.
Councilwoman Borgens.
I echo the comments of this has been a great document, although it's very heavy reading, but it's interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about the sales tax because it is 17% of our budget, or almost 18%. So I think as a city, it behooves us to really protect our sales tax revenue, and that would be from our businesses, our auto sales. We tend to be losing a lot of our auto sales, and they're not just closing, they're moving to other cities. So I would like to find a way, and I don't know how we do that, as a city to find a way of helping them stay. And if that's reaching out to them, if our economic development department find out what we can do to help them stay. I realize that sometimes they don't own the property and therefore the property gets sold, but there might be a way of holding on to that, because that's a huge percentage. So if we're going to look at the expenditures, we have to look at 70% of our sales, and 70% of our revenue is our sales tax. So that's everything that gets sold in our community. So that's, from our smallest mom and pop shops to our larger. So even if we were to look and think outside the box, and I don't know how popular this thought is, but even some anchor retail downtown, the malls are struggling. They're really struggling right now. So if we reached out to some of those larger stores, and I won't mention them because I don't want to go on record and say we're doing that, as city attorney's looking at me like, please don't. But there are some opportunities, I think, to reach out to some of them who are struggling in the malls and possibly want to get back into a community, and having that type of larger name draws downtown and will help everyone downtown. We have some nice retail stores right now, but I don't feel we have enough of them. And I think when people come downtown, they want to shop. I know I do. I'll eat downtown, then want to walk around, and I want to shop. So I would like to see us really do something to protect our sales, our sales tax revenue, because I see it kind of being we're not in control of state or federal, but we are in control of what we can possibly provide in our city. So I would really like to see us reach out, especially our auto sales. I would like to see us do something, because that's huge. And I would like to keep that. I know the report said that, some of it has changed because the way people buy today, they're leasing, they're not buying. But I'm also seeing businesses are moving and not staying. So, if we could look into that and find out how we can reach out to them. I will weigh in on the minimum wage. I do agree. I think there's a huge conversation that needs to go around that piece, because, and I have seen that when you raise the minimum wage, then mom and pops need to raise their cost of their service to pay that fee, and it just kind of keeps going up. Nobody wins on this. So how high is high? How far do we want to go? And I also do agree that people need to be able to make a living wage, to be able to stay in your community. So there's a whole bigger piece of that conversation that needs to take place. I have seen small mom and pop say, yes, go ahead and raise it, and I'm going to now raise the cost of my meal to offset that, and now you can't afford to eat there because now that price is. So sometimes it doesn't balance out. Sometimes it does, because, people will spend what they have, liquid funds to spend on, and I want people to be able to stay in our community at the same time. So, we're struggling as it is. I have some more here. So the anchor retail, the majority courthouse. When it comes to the courthouse square, I would like to actually see us kind of do a reassessment of the whole piece, and how are our shops downtown, are our retail business downtown actually benefiting from this? I hear yes, I hear no. I hear the street closures are doing more harm, and yet I hear it's bringing a lot of people to downtown. So I think if we brought in those that are most affected by these street closures, when we have these events, let's just ask them, are you benefiting from this? And yet it is our downtown living room, and we have advertised it as such. So we don't want to lose an opportunity for people to have entertainment, but we want to make sure our city is getting the benefit from that. And the cost of providing that is not overriding what our community is benefiting from. So I think there's an opportunity now to revisit it. We've been doing it for so long, and there may be some opportunities to change, because it's a huge expense which is a good expense. It's not a bad thing because it's entertainment. But we want to make sure we're getting the best benefit for our city when it comes to what it's costing us and what we're getting back from it. So I would like to see the research and the outreach done to our downtown and to our merchants. When we talk about street closures, I'm glad you preferenced it was Middlefield Way and not Olive Milford Road. The other thought that came up recently was looking at, and I'm not sure how this is received, but changing some of the directions of the streets into one way and to, changing that into one-way streets rather than two-way, like one street going one way, the next street going the other. And I don't know how that looks, but it was something that was actually done back east, and it met with some resistance, but it ended up being very beneficial to their downtown and how they moved around. So I don't know what that would look like. One of the other things is looking at our revenue ability for our downtown. I would like to see us look at our parking structure and our parking fees on the street, not necessarily in our parking lots or parking garages, but our ability to bring people downtown and actually stay there. And is there a way to say, rather than 2 hour only, you get the first 2 hours free and then you pay? I mean, there's another opportunity to provide people to want to come into our downtown, spend money in our downtown, and not feel like they're going to get penalized if they're, 2 hours for, an hour and a half for lunch is a good thing. But if you're 2 hour minimum, we're getting a lot of pushback on, at least I'm hearing it, from people that say, I don't go downtown because, if I had 1 hour free, I'd be able to go down there and spend all day. And so, is it a revenue generating thing we want with that, or do we want to promote our businesses? And because currently, if you go to our businesses on the other side, Woodside Plaza, Roosevelt Plaza, there are no parking restrictions, and there's a parking lot, and grant you, those merchants pay for that benefit, but it's just a thought. I would just like to have us take another look at our parking structure, our parking fee structure, not our parking structure. I love the way our garages have now changed, but I think our parking fee structure. So I think that's my comments for now.
Councilwoman Howard.
Thank you. Ms. McCarthy, I just wanted to, first of all, start by saying thank you to you and every staff member who's here and is maybe at home resting from creating this document. But I really wanted to thank you. I've read many, many budgets in many years, and I have to say, and I'm honestly saying this is the most thorough, clear, transparent, easy to understand, and useful document that I have read in a long time. And I really mean that. I'm going to keep that in the trunk of my car to refer to when people ask me questions. I mean, just the community profile alone, that was genius. And I don't know who's responsible for it. You're pointing somewhere.
Alex and his staff. Mm-hmm.
You're a genius, Alex. What can I say? I mean, for somebody who either moves here or somebody who's been here forever, to read through the community profile, I mean, it's not just about city and what we do. It's the overall community and what we are, what the fabric is, who are the businesses and the services. And it's just marvelous. It really is. And I know it wasn't one person. I know everyone contributed to it. But I just wanted to tell you that this is really a remarkable document, and I feel like moving forward, we are in very good hands. I'm so glad we went to a 5-year budget, and that we are able to forecast out and make the kinds of changes that we need to make and anticipate what we need to anticipate. So I would say that the revenues and expenses, they're going to be tough. That's not going to be easy at all, especially the reductions. That's going to be, I think, harder than trying to generate revenue, because we're really good at finding new ways to make money. We really are, I think, a pretty entrepreneurial group of people, whether it's offering other cities services or just figuring out new ways to do things better. But the reductions, they may be painful, and I'm glad we're kind of spacing it out over a period of time so we can absorb it and possibly weather it a little bit better. What I like is that I get the feeling from this document that we're all in it together, and that made me feel really good. I'm glad we do not brag. Let's say celebrate, because it's really a city thing. Celebrate our successes, and I'm very proud of some of the things that we've done, despite the fact that we don't have a lot of surplus. But the fact that we've come so far in public art and the promotion of public art in our community, that we have come so far in entertaining, entrepreneurial, out-of-the-box thinking, I'll call it. And the example I'm thinking of is the Magical Bridge. I mean, that's so out of the box. We'll be only the second one in this area and maybe the second one in the United States. I mean, this just takes out-of-the-box thinking, and we find ways of doing these things. And I'm very proud of that. Our library, every department, Public Works, they're the ones under the radar. They don't get the sexy jobs, and I know that. But the work that they do in this community to keep things running smoothly that most people don't even know about, I commend them. I just thought this would be a good time to say thank you, because I really mean it. A job well done to the city. I had some questions for Melissa earlier. I had a little bit of concern that in the whole document, and I really looked, I couldn't find anywhere that graffiti was being addressed. And graffiti in this community is starting to creep up. I know a lot of you have noticed it, and it concerns me a lot, because when graffiti starts coming back, people start feeling unsafe. It's going to be a natural feeling for people if they do that. Those of us who've lived through that back in the early 90s and late 80s, remember that it was a scary time when you'd walk and you'd see graffiti large as life and no one was doing anything about it. I'm glad, and I felt much better after talking with Melissa, that she assured me that there are several departments handling it. They each handle different things, whether it be the garages or the parks or public streets and sidewalks. I know code enforcement is handling private. So I'm hoping that the people who do have private graffiti on their private property, will cooperate with our city staff. I'd hate to see that we'd have to take it a step further and initiate some kind of penalizing for people who just don't care enough about our community that they make sure it goes away. But I wanted to assure the public, even though I couldn't find it specifically highlighted, that it is being addressed, and there is a graffiti hotline, and you can go on our website and find that graffiti hotline. You can also use My Redwood City. It takes 2 to 3 business days to remove graffiti from public property. If it's private property, we'll take that information in, and we will ask code enforcement or the appropriate department to go address it. But I thought it was important to mention, because I know it's of real importance to me. I think when a city takes pride and erases their graffiti, it sends a positive message to our residents. It also sends a message to those who think it's okay, that it's not okay, and we won't accept that. So thank you, Melissa, for answering that question for me. Also, our successes, I already spoke with the port. I was a little saddened that under their accomplishments, they only put 2, and only out of those 2, they didn't even include ferry service, and that's sad, because we're working very strongly with them right now on Regional Measure 3. We're on a subcommittee task force, and we are working with our electeds in the state and with the Water Emergency Transit Authority to make sure that water in transit in Redwood City will be part of Regional Measure 3 funding. That's how it gets done. So I think that I've made them aware of it, so maybe they'll talk more about it in the future. But other than that, I guess the last 2 things, minimum wage, I've been wrestling with this one because I'm concerned about the number of staff hours that it's going to take. I had a question about the after after we do it, it would require ongoing implementation costs of approximately 500 hours, which I'm calculating that would be over 2 months of time every year to implement this. And I'm not clear why. If we do have San Jose do the implementation, why would we take some staff time of over 2 months? And is that something that has been factored in or not?
I'll just briefly speak to that. So it hasn't been factored in from the perspective that we have not assumed this was happening and dedicated staff time to it going forward. But we are basing that estimate based on the experiences of other cities who have adopted local minimum wage. The enforcement is on a complaint basis, and while ultimately the model could be, as many cities have done, to ask the city of San Jose to actually do the enforcement, we'd still have obligations around receiving complaints, around periodically educating, business owners and employers. And so we do think there's an ongoing obligation that we would have that we think amounts to about 500 hours a year.
Well, as I said, I've been wrestling with it, but my heart says it's something we need to do. We have people leaving this community. They can't catch a break. If we could, at the very least, try to enforce something around minimum wage, a $15 minimum wage, I think that may go a long way in keeping some of our families here. So I'd be willing to say that probably would be a good investment of our time and our money. The other about Courthouse Square, I'm not convinced we need a thorough evaluation between public-private. I mean, I'm really glad we have private because the public doesn't pay the bills. They're getting the services for free, and the private is actually paying the bills so that we can offer a lot of the services for free for residents. But what I would like to see is maybe better communication with residents by using our flashing signs ahead of time to let people be aware of when a street closure is going to happen so that they can know, don't go on Broadway or in front of the Fox Theater on these days. Also talking with our merchants, and we can do that through our different associations downtown. I just think better communication might help in that regard, and in the future when we have shuttle service, which I hope we will, I think it'll help even more. But I'd rather not use those hours on that particular topic unless there was an urgent need coming from staff that they're overwhelmed, but that's not what I'm hearing. So I would let that one go, and I'd move forward on the minimum wage. Thank you.
Councilwoman Aguirre.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimbra staff, for this report. The budget, we used to get it on longer pages sometimes, since I really like the fact that it's short and fat instead of long and skinny. When we look at the budget that would be in your, it would be on page number 7, and I know you had it on the screen as well. We have $9 million dollars that were the net change, and that doesn't include the UUT information. Was that money used at all to help us in 2017-18, the net difference, the net change in fund?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes.
So the
page
9.9 million.
It's for 2016-17. There is a net change in fund balance of $9,865,000. And how are we using that coming over to this year as we started 2017-18?
So my name's Derek Rampon. I'm Financial Services Manager.
Thank you.
A lot of that is money that's going to be rolled over for capital projects or other funds, depending on timing of expenditures. So each year, we don't look at it on an annual basis. Some funds will carry forward and be used in subsequent years. So that's what some of that is. Most of that is.
And I'm really glad to hear that, because as we look at next year, it's going to be a lot less. And so I'm glad to hear that we're being fiscally responsible in that way when we have the funding, because there's funding that we can't use for other things that we can use for that. Do we know what's happened to the $10 million that we're waiting for from the Department of finance at the state for our redevelopment funding. Has that come in recently?
So I can answer that. We're still on hold waiting for a hearing from the appellate court, and hopefully we'll get a hearing so that we can get that money back.
Okay, that would be nice. Thank you. And some of the things that you are funding this year, I'm really excited about, and they are not big budget items, but it makes a difference into our strategic goals, that you mentioned earlier, the Pilot Ranger program, the language training program, library materials. You know, when you look at those funds, they're not a lot, and they make such a difference in our community. So I'm really excited that we went with programs like this, which I think they're not big budget, but they say to the community, we value you in all of these different aspects. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And, you know, we did hear from Dr. Haveman about the forecasting about the economic downturn. So I'm glad that we are, as I look at next year's budget, the revenue is going to be less, but the expenditures are less, and we're looking at ways of making sure we add in $6 million and we reduce $6 million. So I think those are great targets. As far as the local minimum wage, there's no question in my mind we have to work on that. I don't think it should take 900 hours. I'm not debating that it's right or wrong, but I think there's enough cities around us that are doing it that we need to learn and just jump on it. That's a no-brainer for me. $15 is nothing in this community to live and to pay rent and to put your children in the daycares that we just heard earlier. So I don't know what it's going to take, and if it takes us being involved. And I know that I had mentioned because I brought this up as well as Councilmember Mazur when we first were thinking about this last summer. You know, we should be able to work and partner with the chamber and have them do some of the work and talk to some of the businesses. And what we've heard, and it's anecdotal, is that there are enough businesses already doing it. They're already doing the right thing. So I think let's look at that. But we need to do that. We need to be a leader in San Mateo County on that. And there's no question in my mind on that one. As far as the assessment of some of the benefits that we offer, such as the events and the concerts, you know, this is a question that I would want to talk to the Downtown Business Group, to the RCIA, to the businesses downtown. I am sure if we shut those down or minimize those, it's going to affect them. And sometimes you have to offer things that are not a direct revenue impact, but it's a direct community benefit in the sense that it helps our businesses. They're happier. They work with us. You know, when we built the parking lot under the theater, we lost money every single year. I can't remember if it was over $1 million every single year because it provided a community benefit for our merchants to get the revitalization started. And that was something that the council decided we need to invest in. It hurt our pocketbook, but it was worth it. And I think that having some of the events, I know we've already cut down on the events, and I know it does take a lot of staff time. I see them at 5 o'clock in the morning when we have an event. They're getting ready. We have amazing staff, but it offers a benefit to our community that folks up and down the peninsula and even out of the county, many of the counties, because I sit on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, I have colleagues from Solano and other areas saying, we love coming down to your concerts. I mean, it attracts folks from all over, and it bustles our downtown that, you know, helps our small businesses. So those are two things that I think are priorities. And when I think of the other things that we're spending on, I don't think it's something that we should cut out, because that's what when we looked at our downtown precise plan, one of the things we said we wanted to be is an entertainment hub of the peninsula. And that includes not only just our wonderful theaters, our cinemas, but it also includes what we've developed in our square that is now well known for their concerts, Shakespeare, the Salsa Festival, Oktoberfest, the Chinese New Year, a lot of things that bring a variety of folks and really develop community.
Councilmember G.
Thank you, Mayor Siebert and Ms. McCarthy and Ms. Stevens. I want to also share my thank you and gratitude to everyone. This is a great document. I mean, it's a good read. It's a good heft to carry around too, but there's great clarity in here about where we get our money, what it's spent on, community profile, And I know it's a timing issue about when it went to print, but it doesn't even capture all the accomplishments that the city has accomplished in the last fiscal year, just because you had to hit a print deadline. There's been more things that the council and the city has done since then. So it's a great document, and I think it's fiscally appropriate too, given many of us serve on other boards in the region, that the signs are of a slowing economy. I don't think anyone is forecasting a recession, but it's very clear things are slowing down. There's a lot of uncertainty. No one really knows what the crystal ball is going to say 3, 4, 5 years from now. So it is a fiscally appropriate document given the unknowns and how fast things can change on us, whether it be federal policy, healthcare, economics, whatever. There's a lot of gray out there trying to tell us what it might be. And we just don't have great clarity on it. I think I do agree with, I think as Councilmember Howard, one of the greatest things we do is look ahead 5 years and see where we're headed. Not just 1 year, not just 2 years, but we do the best we can to look ahead 5 years so we're not surprised. And even in some of the other places, we're looking ahead 10 years, trying to do our best judgment, which is even scarier given the region and the regional economy. One of the things that I would like to ask that maybe in the mid-year budget review, and Ms. Diaz, you mentioned it in your report, is that on page 16 of the 5-year forecast, you caution that the initial deposit for trust is just that, an initial deposit. And the out years is just blank right now. And I want to thank our labor partners first, because it was our labor partners that worked with us to help get ahead of our unfunded pension liabilities when we had the last downturn. You guys were great partners. Our labor were a great partner with the city before PEPRA came into play. And now with things beyond our control, like CalPERS trying to fake a number, and I still believe the number they've given us is a fake number, we need to take control like the 115 Trust to try to do the best we can. And so that initial deposit of whatever that surplus is between our reserve policy and our end-of-year balance, this is the second step we've made. And it's been a long time, because I know some of us have been asking for us to get ahead of this for 8 years, at least my 8 years here. If we don't do more, all we've done is move the cliff out a year or two. We haven't fixed the problem. We haven't made a dent in the problem. And so at the mid-year budget review next year, I'd like to see that line filled in with some best judgment about what our deposits need to be in the 115 Trust, so that we can kind of figure out where we're headed overall with everything. And heaven forbid that 7% gets changed to something lower. That's just going to be devastating for everybody. When we talk about increasing revenue, I think we are pretty good at figuring things out, and I think we need to put everything on the table, including looking at the TOT. Right now it sits at about 12%, if I recall correctly. I know some of us travel a lot, and when I get that hotel bill at the end of my stay, it ain't 12%. It's 14 plus about 5 other add-ons. And so it adds up to about 1/3 of my hotel room rate. So I think we do a pretty good job here, but I think that should be on the table also, especially if we're going to have anything on the from our charter committee. That's the time to do it. Let's try to, that should be on the table. On the local minimum wage ordinance, can somebody remind me what we're talking about? Are we talking 20 by 20 or 15 by? I mean, what are we talking about? Just I forgot. So could you help me, somebody?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the state's moving towards it, but they're not coming until 2020.
Correct.
And so the idea would be to move as quickly as we can to $15 per hour, and then, I mean, we can look at San Mateo as a guide. We could look at other cities that have done it already as a guide, but I think the first step would be to move us to $15 an hour.
Okay. I mean, I just want to be reminded what we were looking at, and I think we need to look at it. My preference. And I know working with our counties not easy, is that we do it countywide. I really just find it intolerable to to have every city, 20 cities in the county, plus the county, having their own wage ordinance. It makes no sense to me at all. But it does, I mean, I understand the impact financially on our lower income families. I just wish we could do it more holistically rather than, you know, if we're at 85,000, we have one ordinance, and our neighboring cities are at 30,000. They have a different ordinance, and the one next door at 25,000 has a different one. I wish we could just do it all holistically so it's, you know, for some businesses that have businesses in 2 or 3 cities, it just, if I'm the business owner, it drives me crazy because I have to pay people differently in cities and maybe even different benefits. But I think we need to take a look at it. With regard to Courthouse Square, I'm kind of caught in the middle because I think what we need to do in reviewing Courthouse Square events is to, at the minimum, reevaluate why we do it and what's in it for our community, whether it be businesses or our residents. The original strategy, and I may be wrong, was to get people to discover downtown Redwood City. Well, I think we've got people to discover downtown Redwood City. Now, if we're having private events, which is great, but do private events really support our businesses? Or if we have private events, does it help subsidize or further discount the use of Courthouse Square for our nonprofits? So I think before we even go there, we need to kind of go back and say, why do we do it? And what's the purpose of it for our community? And after that, then it can flow into, do we raise rents or costs? Do we lower them? Do we use them to subsidize other events? Do we, you know, what's in it for the community now to have Friday night concerts? If people are coming from around the region, that's great, but how does that affect and how does it benefit our community to discover downtown Redwood City? So I think at a strategic standpoint, why do we do it, whether it's a validation or an adjustment, and then everything else can come from that. But again, I think great document, great forecast. Thank you to everyone who's put this together. I just want to make sure we look ahead right, because I heard correctly, I did my math correctly, between unfunded pension liability and OPEB, that's kind of a big number. That's not going to go away. $300 million is not going to go away by itself without us taking concrete, repeated steps to address that.
Vice Mayor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. I also like to thank all of our staff for 3 things. I mean, first of all, this budget is very well aligned with our priorities. It's very clear that you listen to us loud and clear. It's a conservative budget, which is what we asked for, and it's consistent with our previous budgets in that respect. But it does go into some detail that we've asked for in the past, so we appreciate that. I think it's actually just the right amount of detail, so I'd like to add my thanks to that as well. On the question of minimum wage, there's no doubt for me as well that we should study that we should move forward, and that other cities are doing it successfully. And there have been studies around the country that actually prove it has very positive economic benefits. Earlier tonight, it was said that people are spending money on essentials like housing, which means that they're not spending money on other things like that generate sales tax. That's actually one of the ways that we can help address that concern. And I do think that the estimate of 900 hours is a generous estimate. I think we can do some things, as Councilmember Geary said, to get the council members involved and not have all of that burden of community outreach and the chamber, not have all that fall on our staff. I support Councilmember G's suggestion, too, that we engage with the county and try to figure out how can we get this going on a county level? How can we standardize some language? Let's look at what San Mateo did with its ordinance and see what we can do to try to bring some consensus around this issue. In terms of the concerts, I'm not sure if that was an either-or question. Either we spend time on the minimum wage or on the concerts. And I see you shaking your head, so I'm glad that that's not the case, because I would have prioritized minimum wage. But I do think we should look at the concerts and other activities downtown and just think about what we're trying to do. For me, it's not trying to get people to discover Redwood City. They know about us. To me, it's about community building.
And I think all of us have spent some time going to concerts, seeing people we haven't seen in a long time, watching people make friends. Different nonprofits are involved down there raising money, and even just the Bucket Brigade going around asking people to contribute, I think creates a great sense of place and a great sense of our community. And I personally would like to see those continue. I do think we need to put some policies in place regarding the use of private events on the courthouse square, and that's something where we should probably spend some time, not well, for a lot of reasons, but that's something I think we should explore as well. Thank you.
Okay. You heard my thanks up front. It was a tremendous amount of work, and I've said it before, but Redwood City didn't get in the position where we're in, where we're still able to have in the years that I've been on the council, very healthy budget conversations by making giant, great decisions. I think what you've heard tonight is a lot of work that's gone into this, that's made some very wise, smaller decisions that add up to this. And I actually think that's going to be what it takes moving forward. Going down this list, can certainly recommend this budget. I think it's a great budget. I think your strategy moving forward, I think the key for me moving forward is not to overplan, but to over-prepare. Things happen very, very quickly. The downturn of the economy last time around happened almost overnight. I mean, in relative terms. And so I think we've got to be ready to prepare and be in a position where we can very nimbly respond to what the economy does. And so I get the numbers, and yeah, we need to increase revenue and reduce expenses. That's kind of like losing weight. You need to eat less and exercise more, sort of thing. Not that I'm an expert on that, but I think the reality is what's not in here is the soft things we can do as an organization to stay prepared and to do that, to maintain the amazing communication we've had with our labor groups, to engage really the people that grind out the budget year after year, and that's the people sitting in the audience and around the table at a staff level. That's where the work of this budget happens, and so I think that's important. A couple of things. Working backwards. One, as far as Courthouse Square, I always look at, we're getting to talk about possible solutions, like do we have events, do we not have events? I'm trying to figure out what problem we're trying to solve. And I haven't heard that yet. I mean, if we have a problem, let me know what it is. I'm not saying we don't, but before we get into something and try and solve it by having more or less or the same, I want to know what we're trying to do. And to Councilmember G's comments, why? Why do we have that thing, and what's it exist for? And maybe the why changed, and so therefore maybe what was a problem before isn't a problem anymore, or maybe it's created new problems. But I think we need to start with problem statements around that. In terms of the local minimum wage, I definitely think we need to do it. I mean, I drive by. I think it was, I'm not sure, but it was a local fast food restaurant the other day where I almost went in and just got a job. I'm kidding. I mean, I think they were paying $14 an hour to start. So I don't think we're that far off. I know it's not a requirement yet. And I'm not going to disagree with anything I heard about the need for it. I certainly wholeheartedly believe this should be led by the county, and I'm still waiting for the county to provide some leadership in that area, because I think it's something that they could be doing and should be doing. At the end of the day, though, I also realize this, and I think I have a fairly healthy perspective on it. I look at our staff, and I don't know any of them that aren't working actually more than they're essentially asked to work. I really don't. I mean, in every level of organization, I see them here tonight. I see them at events all the time. I see them at meetings. I know they're involved in things that I'm involved in the city. They're there, and they're working hard on things. So as we look at this, I think we need to understand that unless whether it's 900 hours or 100 hours, even if it's half of that, the reality is that means some things won't get done. We can't. We've said this before. We can't keep. We're going to crush our organization if we keep just adding, building layer and deeper layer. It's like our schedules. We all know that. We know that about ourselves. We can only take on so much, and certain things have to drop off. So I think the next step for this is having a very good conversation. And I would ask that the staff bring back probably in the fall a conversation that's kind of almost a pre-conversation about, okay, so let's look at the details of that 900 hours or whatever it is. And let's look at a timeline of what that would actually mean. And let's look at what that engagement would require. Because I get us doing it, but there's not a lot of bandwidth in us left. I don't know about y'all, there isn't in me. And we're already involved in a ton of other things. And if we are, what are we going to set aside, or what are we going to take on? And what role do we play in that? But I think there's a lot. I think it's a fabulous idea to look at. But I think we need to do a lot more homework on what it means and when it means it, and what it means for our community, who would have to be engaged, where would we do that, and probably do a study session on just the process for doing a minimum wage ordinance. And hopefully by then, we can also have some conversations with the county about what role they can play, and what portion of that they can peel off. But I think that's, for me, the next step is to take some time in a meeting to say, what does it really mean? How many hours is it? Do we agree that it's this, and what things might need to be delayed? And that's okay. I mean, I'm all for delaying some things. I just want to be honest about it and say that there's some things we might not do. And also what that engagement, what that timeline would look like. For me, it's a little bit of a timeline issue. It probably is a lot easier to do if we stretch it out, but we don't want to stretch it out over too long of a period of time, or it'll become irrelevant. So if we're going to do it in a more compact period of time, what's that look like? So, Councilwoman Mazur?
So I just, I feel like we got a pretty clear breakdown of the hours and the steps in the budget. Yeah. And if we wait until fall to come back and have a study session about hours and budget and process, we are not going to get it done in a timely fashion, because it will take some time to do the outreach to the businesses, to have some other pieces. It's pretty, I really appreciated the breakdown of the hours, because it did help me sort of think about, okay, whether it's the right number or not is not for me to say, but it is a breakdown of what's that process and what are the steps that need to happen. That's already laid out for us in the budget. So for me, I'd prefer to sort of say, like, have staff come back and say, okay, so we laid out the steps for you, and so we're going to take this very first step, and if there's a council subcommittee that can help with that, I'm obviously happy to serve on that committee, but I don't want to wait until the fall to come back and have a discussion about process.
A couple of things. Number one, we have one more meeting in June, that's booked. We have a meeting in July, that's booked. We have a meeting in late August, that plus a retreat likely. That'll probably be fairly well compact. So we're into September 11th is probably the earliest that we could. So we're already into the fall without adding special meetings. So, and I think what I'm talking about is getting a really clear, I understand what's in the budget, but getting a really clear picture of what's missing out of there is what staff would be in, exactly what staff, what role would the council play? And looking at, and we've always done this, is what would be the picture of this moving forward, so we can approve it. I heard a lot of things then about, yeah, it's a great idea, and we agree with everything that's in the budget, but I think there's a lot of detail. I've heard questions from all of us almost about what it would mean the next steps, and I don't mean October, November, December. A lot of work can be done before that. I'm asking that a lot of work be done before that. But I think it needs to come back as a separate item for this council to stamp it and say that's what we're going to go do, not part and parcel. I don't feel like, tonight it was one item. I don't feel like it's had a full debate at this level as to what it looks like moving forward. Other than it's a great idea, let's move forward with it, but bring it back to here. And the reality is it won't come back to the fall. That's just the reality of our schedule. Late August at the earliest it would be on an agenda. So is that not, unless somebody wants to add a meeting?
Mayor?
Yeah.
I do feel a sense of urgency, and I get about the meetings. I think what we can do, if I may suggest, is we had talked about this with our city manager, is maybe have an ad hoc committee to at least study it and work. I'm willing to put in the hours with some of the businesses and see what staff can come up with. I'm not saying to add it to a meeting or anything right now, because I know the meetings are planned ahead of time, but I feel a sense of urgency, and I know we'd love for the county to do something, but because it doesn't, that's why other cities have jumped on, and like us to kind of, as much as we can, take the leadership as well. And I think that there's already a lot done that we can pull out and jump on.
And what would that ad hoc committee, what do you see them bringing back to the council?
Well, working with staff and working with the chamber and talking with San Mateo, San Jose, and other cities, and bringing some of that, doing some, actually, Councilmember Bain and Vice Mayor Bain, Councilmember Mazer, myself, we've already done a lot of that research, and we presented a lot. We presented the idea to Ms. Stevenson Diaz, so we've kind of started to, so that's why we want to jump on it.
I think, and timeline-wise?
So the timeline actually that we had laid out wouldn't actually have staff working on it before the fall, to be honest, because of what commitments we already have through the next several months. So I think that we can move fairly quickly after that, starting with the study session that provides you with some background. And I'm certainly hearing loud and clear a willingness for at least some of you to help with the outreach, which would be great. We'd love to give you PowerPoints and send you free into the world. So that, that can be a part of it. But realistically, there are a lot of steps, and I do want to be clear, and they do involve additional time.
So,
a reason to move it, starting though with the fall, is really just if we're going to head towards, say, a January 2019 effective date, we need plenty of time to notify employers.
So how is that different than what I just said? That's exactly what I was saying, was that as we move into this, there's not a lot of bandwidth between now and the fall, even for an ad hoc committee. I mean, if we want to do a lot of the work, I think a lot of that work has already been done. I think that I'm going to default to that, and that's what I heard. So, is somebody hearing anything different about what can happen between now and then?
I could commit to work with the chamber and put out surveys and start bringing in some data.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying is I don't want to sit and wait for the fall. I'd like to, start working and collecting things from San Mateo, San Jose.
I don't think any of that, but that's not, let's face it, that's not the work that involves our staff in bringing it to the full council. That's what I'm talking about. If that can happen, whether or not you have, that's already been happening, right?
Yes,
So,
unofficially.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's moving forward enough that we need to officialize some of that if you've been working on it. But what I also just heard was that our staff isn't prepared to work on it until the fall. And
that's really just because we've made some other commitments. So, for example, we've been doing a lot of work around neighborhood organizing and preparing for National Night Out. There's big events we're trying to gear up for August. And so to set aside, to make enough time to really prepare to bring you a study session sooner than September would truly impact work we already had planned to do. It would impact workload. I'm going to speak for myself and on behalf of Veronica, because both of us would need to be involved that I know I wasn't planning to do over the next 3 months.
That department just got added more things to it.
So it's for those reasons I don't honestly think that we can start on it sooner without impacting pretty seriously some other work. But starting in September, I do think we can move forward on it fairly expeditiously, learning from others, using you all as resources, and doing appropriate community outreach.
Okay. Anything else? Okay.
So I do want to ask for a little bit of clarification around Courthouse Square event, and that because I'm not sure I described it fairly in my verbal comments. So the question that I was asking you is if you want us to do a comprehensive study that looks at what we're doing and why, what kind of impact it has on businesses, pro and con. And so that's the question. It's not whether we keep doing events. It's so much, do you want us to do the kind of analysis that would then lead you to decide, do you want to?
Yeah. Is it that, or is it more anecdotally that, it seems to me like we can get to a lot of those answers with anecdotal information without, big studies of the events, but looking more at how what we're getting a sense from people about the events. And
I'm not talking about hiring a consultant or doing that kind of thing, but I would have to ask staff to spend some time to kind of list out, here's what we plan to do, here's why we plan to do it, here's what we've been doing, here's the feedback we're receiving, here's what we hear from the business community. I hear different things, honestly, from you about whether or not you think things are going well or not, and whether they need to be looked at or not. And so I just want to be clear, we can do that sort of assessment, but I'd like to do it in a thoughtful way, and I'm trying to understand if you want us to do that.
Real quick, I need a piece of clarification. How far out are events scheduled right now? Are we talking events are pretty well planned out? Public and private, are they planned out until early 2018? At least through
Yes.
So into early 2018, they're already planned out. So we're not going to make any changes with the current calendar, right? I mean, we're not going to suddenly go, oh, we changed our mind. You're done.
No, but if you wanted to do something different, we'd want to do that study this
Right.
fall.
But
so
I
we
think
know
that,
for 18.
for me, that informs the timing of it, and it can be stretched out much further because we're not trying to create it. Anyways, Councilwoman Mazur, did you have?
Well, I guess I just, since I didn't comment on this at all, I think the question was, what is the problem we're trying to
Yeah.
solve? And I'm still not really understanding
Not either.
where this problem came from. I don't know. Chris, did you have an answer?
Please.
Thank you. What I've heard and what we struggle with sometimes is how many private events should we have on the courthouse square.
Okay.
They drive revenue for us, and everything is self-supporting for events, except for, thankfully, the council voted for approved coordinator to run those events. But everything else is generated through different revenue streams, and we're finding that private rentals is a really great income generator for us. But at what cost, and how much should we do, when we should say no? And again, we have a great alignment of partnerships with the museum and the Fox and so forth. But again, how does that affect other businesses? So I think that was one of the things that I've heard, and there are other.
So how much of a good thing is too much?
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of saying that.
Well, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Vice Mayor Bain.
So I'll elaborate that. I mean, I've heard some of the same things, not only from businesses who complain about streets being shut down, impacting their business, but also from residents who say it's difficult to get around. You know, why are we using public property for a private event? I think, revenue generation is a perfectly good answer to that. But what I would suggest we do is just agendize this for a future meeting. I don't think it has to be in the fall, especially because events are planned so far out. But when it's convenient, agendize this with what we know. I don't think we need to go out and do a comprehensive study. We'll invite the business community, we'll notify residents and ask them to come and participate in that discussion. And if we need to gather more information, we can gather more information. But I think we can have that study session with a lot of the information we already have on hand.
And I actually think in the way that we did with housing, I think this is a great opportunity. And I would look to Parks Rec Commission. I mean, that's a great commission of people really in touch with the community. And perhaps it's a joint session between you and Civic Cultural Commission. I mean, why don't we push it there and have you get together and have some conversations about how do you balance it? I mean, how much of a good thing is too much of a good thing? Revenue's great, but at some point it becomes too. Well, I don't know that I'm not going to say too much revenue becomes a problem, but I think you know what I mean. So I think that's a great
the
place.
revenue is overtaken by the amount of staff time.
That's a great place to push it. So if we can push it there and then come back with a report to us, in next year sometime, that would be great. Okay.
Thank you.
And with that, I will look at. I think what we'll do is potentially use the existing to begin to lay some groundwork for when staff can start working on the minimum wage. One of the things I think, and I think we even talked about this, would be to use the Finance Committee right after an appointing. That's Vice Mayor Bain, Councilwoman Aguirre. If the Finance Committee could take that up and just look at some of the information that we'd need so we can move very quickly with that, and then also the two groups working on it, and briefly, if that's what I was looking at. I don't want to set your agenda for you. I'll let you guys do that. But if you guys can do that, that would be just a great start on what groundwork needs to be done on the minimum wage work so that we can hit the ground running when it gets started. In the fall, I mean, I look at our agendas in the fall, and I think we can do it some valid service when our community is back together anyways, with having a major study session on it and what that looks like. I'd also like to look at what other groups potentially that involves and how we invite people to that meeting. We may need, it's going to be a very, very robust and popular issue. And I think we may need to look at how we do that to capture all that, because I think it's going to be a big issue.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we were anticipating there'd be more than one. So
well, yeah, but I mean, I think it'll catch a lot of people. Okay, so with that, this comes back to 26th.
Right, so I do need to actually have you take action on the recommendation.
Oh, that's right. And then it comes back on the
resolution.
26th for the final vote. Okay. I'll take a motion.
Move to adopt a resolution setting June 26th as the date for public hearing on the adoption of the recommended budget, et cetera, et cetera.
A motion, a second electronic vote, please.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
That was Sylvia's last vote. Sorry, I kind of geek out on this trivia kind of stuff, but that was, I had to say that was Sylvia's last time announcing the vote. Unless we can vote on something else. Conferences, committee reports. We have personnel met. I think you know why we met, and we worked out the details of hiring the new city clerk. Communications. Who wants to give that?
Just attended the sustainability San Mateo County last week here at our library that we hosted. Very informative. All the things that we've been talking about, all the indicators report that I'd be happy to share. And I think most of you got this report by email, which is very interesting about our county. Just the fact that we have 64,531 jobs and only 3,844 housing units in the county of San Mateo, and so on and so forth. So.
And Communications Committee? Vice Mayor Bain?
Sure. I'll do that as well as a quick charter committee update. So we met as a communications committee. We mostly focused on the community survey and how we want to approach that going forward, what kind of information we're looking for, and possibly doing a competitive bid on the vendor. Cool. And then we just had a charter committee right before the open session here, and we just talked about some cleanup language that we'd like to put on the charter next fall, as well as some more, I'd say, items that need further discussion. So we'll be meeting again in August to see how we can move those forward.
Perfect. Thank you. And that was both of those. And designation of voting delegates. So I know that Councilwoman Mazur will be going to the California League of Cities Conference and has agreed to be the voting delegate. So I think by consensus, we'll do that. Is anybody else attending, Councilwoman Aguirre? If you'll be the alternate to that, that would be great. Thank you, Councilwoman Mazur, for doing that. Thank you for both for attending. And Councilwoman Borgens, I know you might attend, and I don't know if others are going to attend, but thank you for doing that on those items. So with that, are the other event or committee reports out? Councilmember G?
Not necessarily a committee report, but at the last council meeting, I shared with you the great news from Washington, D.C. about the funding for our FFGA grant for Caltrain. The notice to proceed to the train builder has been issued, so they're moving forward full steam ahead. And I believe the groundbreaking is currently being scheduled for middle of July, and so the rest of it is underway. So this is as close to a shovel-ready project as you can get.
I think you mean a full electricity ahead, right?
Clean energy better be ready, so because we did approve clean energy for the electrification too. And then, Councilmember Giddy, did you want to mention anything about the list of projects from San Mateo County for RM3, or maybe next month you can share?
I can do that. I didn't bring it with me. They just started to distribute it. We spent actually 3 hours on RM3 discussions at the MTC meeting last Friday. So there's still the 101 Managed Lane, Woodside 84. I'm blanking on some of them, but it was very sad to see, Councilmember Howard, that a ferry is not part of San Mateo County, except enhancing the ferry systems that already exist, but not for Redwood City. I'm sorry, not for Redwood City. So that's not on the RM3 list, for projects and these come from the counties. These come from each one of our counties. And so there is a proposal to fund and I'm going from memory, the existing ferries and improve them, but nothing for coming down to Redwood City.
Well, I know the Water Emergency Transit Authority has a strategic plan, and they're going to submit that as part of Regional Measure 3, and Redwood City is mentioned in that very strongly. So I know we're all going to be lobbying for that, and
because it wasn't at the MTC, it didn't make it to any of the cuts that go to Metropolitan Transportation Commission.
Well, I'll look into that. Thank you.
Okay. With that, we are adjourning in memory tonight of two people. So, Vice Mayor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to adjourn in memory of John Domansky, and I want to acknowledge that John's wife is here with us tonight, and let you know that our heartfelt sympathies go out to you. John K. Domansky passed away at home surrounded by loving family on May 18th, 2017 at age 56. A resident of Redwood City since 1990 and formerly of Sonoma County, John lived an active life through his work at Menlo Atherton High School, worship at Redeemer Lutheran Church, and service through the Peace Corps and ICYE. John was a beloved husband, father, son, friend, disciple, cousin, and colleague. John bravely fought cancer for 2.5 years before succumbing to its debilitating effects. John is survived by his wife, Lisa Hicks, and children, Sarah and Liam Dumansky. A celebration of life will be held on Saturday, June 17th, 2017, which is this Saturday at 2 p.m. at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Redwood City. In lieu of flowers, please consider donating to Mission Hospice in San Mateo. Contributions in memory of John may be sent to the Cancer Research and Support Organization of your choice.
Thank you. We'll also be adjourning in memory tonight of Tony Saldou. Tony was a beloved member of the staff here, and on Thursday, May 18th, 2017, she lost her 7-month battle against appendix cancer. She is very much missed not only by her husband Patrick and her children Xavier, Serena, and Andre, but also her extended family and many who had the pleasure to cross paths with her, many right here in this building. Tony was born Antonia Elena Gonzalez in Southern California, daughter of Lorraine Guerrero. She had 2 sisters, Natalie and Yolanda, and a brother David. She had an extraordinary energy and drive. Her drive enabled her to accomplish many things, from the day-to-day tasks of being a mom to making sure the house was perpetually spotless and planning family vacations, to her work in the finance department in the city of Redwood City, where she worked with great integrity for over 17 years. Tony was an active member of the Bay Area Christian Church, teaching people the Bible and serving others by making meals, house cleaning, and giving her heart. She also devoted herself to the San Mateo High School Music Boosters and eventually became the Music Booster Presidents. If all this wasn't enough, in 2015, she went back to school and earned an MBA from Notre Dame Dana Muir University. We are very proud of her. Tony didn't shade the truth and was very real. We always knew what Tony was thinking or feeling and where you stood with her. It is this openness combined with her love that allowed us to feel so close to her. One of Tony's favorite quotes was, quote, "Faith makes all things possible, not easy." She was not afraid of things that were not easy and often dreamed of what could be possible. We love you, Tony, and thank you for your years of service to Redwood City, and peace be with your family. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn in the memory of John Dumansky and Tony Saldou.
So moved.
Second. Motion is second. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you.